money. Africa in Business, 4 till 5 p.m. 5 till 6. We put on a little bit more. For brands, media planning, and advertisers, Channel Africa is more than just a platform. It's an opportunity. With 20 color, Vue d'Afrique, with Joël Moteba. We go to East and Central Africa and find Darubinia Africa with I Am Shakif. Madapiri gives us some life. Zochitika, 7 till 8 p.m. Mariamo Kumalo comes in 8-5 compelling shows covering current affairs, sports, business, music, and lifestyle. We deliver an engaging Pan-African audience ready to connect, invest, and act. Multi-award winning. Till 9, we get some useful knowledge. Kalodiscopia. 9 till 10, we take a look in Africa and beyond. Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla. And we close it up with some love. The Hotlines with Shailen Dikumana. 10 till 12 p.m. on Channel Africa. Across borders, across time zones. On air, online. This is Channel Africa. African, internationally recognized, digitally accessible across the globe.
After that,
when Africa
our name is
speaks,
Asanda,
the
Beda,
world
coming
listens.
to you from our Johannesburg studios. And whether you're joining us on DSTV 802 or OpenView 628 or www.channelafrica, we appreciate you coming into the show and being with us until 9. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Asanda, Beda. Yeah, it is Thursday and it's almost the end of the month and it's almost the end of Africa Month. And I just wonder if you've been mindful of Africa this last month. If you haven't, you've got 3 days left.
Yeah, basically. And that means we're halfway through the year.
Exactly. It's scary, eh?
So what can we look forward to this coming hour or this first hour? Fighting has continued in the eastern DRC after another attempt to peace talks has failed. And also we're looking at industries in Gabon having welcomed the appointment to cabinet of a unionist, Patrick Barbera Isaac, is appointed Minister of Labour. All those and more we'll be touching on in this first hour of Rise and Shine.
But first, your news with Jwalani Tulongwepe.
And then sports will follow with Fikile Lingwati. Just the headlines for now.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Many suspect he's preparing a clampdown on the media as his supporters are pushing for his stay in government in 2030. Mnangagwa sent a stern warning against the media.
The past trends where media practitioners competed for prominence on the degree to which they demonized our country has no place in Zimbabwe we fought for. We are building the Zimbabwe we all want, including the media. Content that harms our country and the fellow citizens has no space in our constitutional democracy under my watch.
Kenya's President William Ruto has publicly apologized to Tanzania for having raised tension between neighboring countries. Some Kenyans on social media have been targeting Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan following the recent detention and deportation of prominent East African activists. Angry Tanzanian MPs on Monday accused Kenyans of cyberbullying and disrespecting Tanzanian sovereignty and meddling in domestic affairs. The diplomatic row was triggered by the deportation of activists who had travelled to Tanzania to attend the trial of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. South Africa's Conservative Party Secretary General Floyd Shivambu has conceded that other parties' parliamentary representatives on making positive contributions to policy formulation, they need to be further capacitated to do their work. In an interview with SABC News, Shibambo rejected the notion that the MK party's voice as the official opposition in the legislature is muted, saying unlike the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters, the party does not seek unnecessary attention, choosing instead to work with the people.
If you pay close attention, you realize that there is a lot of work that is being done, and there's a lot of policy positions and propositions that we got from our representatives which get to be submitted in the Steering Committee on Finance, in the Defense Portfolio Committee, and a variety of other interventions as well as to just what should happen. And one other thing which South Africa should appreciate is that Mkhonto weSizwe is not the Democratic Alliance. Mkhonto weSizwe is not the Economic Freedom Fighters. Mkhonto weSizwe is its own party, does not play to the gallery for just attention of social media.
Human Rights Watch says Ugandan authorities have perpetrated widespread discrimination and violence against the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people in the 2 years since the Anti-Homosexuality Act became law. It says authorities have further spread misinformation and hatred against LGBT people, making existing discrimination even worse. The organization is calling on authorities to end their crackdown on LGBT people. Human Rights Watch Uganda senior researcher Oriem Nyeko.
What we found in our research is that not only did it criminalize same-sex acts, but it's also created a climate where LGBT people, their families, their supporters, their allies, and even organizations that work to help them are facing many different forms of persecution. And the government, unfortunately, hasn't taken steps to redress the challenges that these groups are facing. In the last 2 years, a range of different human rights abuses.
And finally, renowned Kenyan author and academic Ngugi wa Thiong'o has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta in Georgia yesterday. Wa Thiong'o spent most of his time calling on Africans to reclaim their languages and cultures. He was imprisoned, beaten and banned in his own country, which he left in the 1970s and later settled in California. Sharon Bryce Peace has the story.
Daughter Wanjiku wa Ngugi said it was with a heavy heart that they announced the passing of their father on Wednesday morning. She wrote in a Facebook post that he lived a full life, fought a good fight, and that his last wish was a celebration of his life and work. His debut novel, Weep Not Child, was published in 1964, the first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa. He wrote at least 8 novels, including the politically conscious Petals of Blood, 3 collections of short stories, several plays, a collection of non-fiction and children's books, and was often favoured to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was targeted by former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, including his arrest and imprisonment in 1977 for a year, after which he lived in exile until Moi's retirement in 2002.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Mamelodi Sundowns chairperson comments on special FIFA transfer window, and the PGA Tour has scrapped starting strokes at the season-ending Tour Champions. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
So every day after the news, we give you a roundup of some stories happening in and around our continent that you may have missed, or maybe you want a different angle to the stories you already know. So we start today with Sudan, and the authorities say rebuilding Sudan's infrastructure will cost hundreds of billions of dollars, but with fighting continuing and aid drying up, people are left with enduring weeks-long power outages and dirty drinking water. David Doyle has more.
The conflict between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has killed and injured tens of thousands of people. But it's also decimated the very systems on which a society is built. Sudanese authorities estimate the cost of reconstruction at hundreds of billions of dollars. In the capital Khartoum, residents endure weeks-long power outages, unclean water and overcrowded hospitals. Sudanese authorities estimate reconstruction needs at $300 billion for Khartoum and $700 billion for the rest of the country. That's amid what aid groups call the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
South Africa's International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says that the continent's calls for the implementation of the peace and security framework in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Minister Lamola was speaking in Uganda after participating in the 12th high-level meeting of the Regional Oversight Mechanism of the Peace and Security and Cooperation Framework on the DRC.
And obviously, with new developments, we continue to call for a ceasefire, for a peaceful engagement of all the role players, state and non-state actors, and we're glad with the progress that the meeting is making. Obviously, we support the resolutions of the UN with regards to all the external support to cease and to withdraw, and also the M23 to cease its continuous advancement in the Eastern DRC. And we believe that there is a very big role to be played by the PSC of the AU and also the new facilitators that have been appointed by both the SADC and the East Africa Community.
Namibia held its first National Remembrance Day on Wednesday for more than 70,000 Africans who were massacred by German colonial forces more than a century ago. The victims were targeted because they refused to let the colonizers take their land and cattle. The BBC's Ailsa Ochni has more.
For many years, Germany did not publicly acknowledge the genocide of the Overherero and Nama communities that took place between 1904 and 1908. But 4 years ago, Germany apologised for its role in the slaughter. Almost 40 years before their use in the Holocaust, concentration camps and pseudo-scientific experiments were used by German officials to torture and kill people in what was then called Southwest Africa.
Uganda's Energy Minister Ruth Nankabirwa says that Uganda is making a bold move towards energy security by looking beyond traditional sources like hydropower. The Ugandan government has contracted a South Korean firm to begin site evaluations for the proposed Buyende nuclear power plant. Uganda's Minister of Energy and Mineral Development is Ruth Nankabirwa.
The contract we've signed is to allow this company to go on site. The first site is in Buyende, which is estimated to generate 8,400 megawatts. Currently, the ministry is in the process of acquiring about 30 square kilometers of land, and the resettlement action plan study is being conducted in a few weeks' time to come.
A digital tool developed in Kenya is offering the deaf community a new way to communicate by using motion capture and AI to provide real-time sign language interpretation. Fiona Jones reports.
The app, Terp 360, translates speech and text into Kenya's sign language using 3D avatar. Developed by tech startup Signverse, it uses motion capture and AI to provide real-time sign language interpretation. CEO Eli Savatia.
Imagine a deaf girl going to a medical setting, perhaps has a consultation, reproductive health. Sensitive information is involved. The doctor is perhaps not culturally sensitive enough to serve them. They don't have access to a sign language interpreter. And such kind of situations really necessitate that we do need to have tools. We do need to have access to, if not sign language interpretation.
Savatia said that the app is being developed to use different dialects, with aims to replicate their approach for other regions and countries.
And that's how we come to the end of today's edition of the Africa Roundup. We'll have more for you tomorrow after the 6 o'clock news. Stay with us. Coming up shortly, Asanda will be taking a look at some of the stories that have been playing out in the Central Africa region.
Are you ready to level up your influence, your content, and your career? Join us at the Africa Creator Festival, where Africa's biggest brands and media powerhouses meet. From masterclasses, exclusive brand collabs, to the official signing of the Creator Charter. It's all happening at africacreatorfestival.com. Your next big move starts here, in partnership with the SABC. And remember, limited spots with unlimited possibilities. Book your tickets today at Quicket. Africa Creator Festival, powered by you.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
14 minutes past 6 Central African time. We now take a look at some of the stories making headlines, zooming into Central Africa. And we're joined on the line by geopolitical analyst and columnist Aaron Ngambi. Aaron, good morning to you on this Thursday. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Good morning to you, Asanda, and good morning to the listeners this morning.
Great. Always great catching up with you. Let's start today with the DRC, where the former DRC President Joseph Kabila is said to have broken his self-exile of 2 years and he's back in the country. How do we know for sure that he is in the DRC? Reports are saying it's the first time he's in the country since 2 years, which was said before when there were allegations that he's in the country.
Yeah, so from the reports, we have heard that former President Joseph Kabila is back in the DR Congo. And this comes after the Senate in that country lifted his immunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that he's making an attempt to be able to come back home and register his presence, because he's been away for at least 2 years now in self-imposed exile. And this is the first time that we are getting reports that he's actually in the eastern DR Congo, that he arrived in Goma, which is the big city in Kiev, in the northern province. And we know this because this news was brokered by the M23 spokesperson from the conflicted region. But also the same news was confirmed by one of the youth leaders of the party that President Kabila belongs to, which is the People's Party for Reconstruction and Democracy. So the party has confirmed through the youth leader, I think his name is Mr. Mimoro, and he has confirmed that President Kabila is in the eastern DR Congo, even though we have not seen footage or anything like that to substantiate that claim.
Word from a rebel spokesperson, as you say, having welcomed Kabila into the country, was reportedly on social media. Should the rebel group say anything at this point, given that he has been accused of being connected to the M23 rebel group, which he has denied? Should the rebel group say anything?
That is the most interesting part. And I think that of all the places that Kabila could have gone to, we're hearing reports that he's actually arrived in Goma, in the eastern province of the DR Congo. And I think that because of the allegations that he has been somewhat behind sponsoring the M23 rebels, this is actually not very good news on the part of President Kabila, as well as his party that has already been banned from Kinshasa. So you're right. I think that it raises a lot of questions about his involvement in this conflict or what is really going on. But for this news to have come from the spokesperson of the M23 rebel group is very worrisome, if it's true.
What are his plans there? Do we know?
Well, he has claimed that even before we heard that he's back in the country, he has claimed that he was going to go to the DR Congo so that he can help facilitate for a peace deal between the rebels and the government of President Tshisekedi. Now, this is very, very hard to actually envision because President Tshisekedi and his predecessor, President Kabila, have fallen out. They've had serious issues in the past, and like I mentioned, even his political party, the People's Party for Reconstruction and Democracy, has been banned in Kinshasa, and also his immunity was just lifted by the Senate. So we see that the claims that he can actually help in facilitating for some kind of peace deal is really above me. But this is what he believes he can do, and that's why he said he was going back to the DR Congo.
Let's stay with the country. DRC, we know fighting has continued there in the eastern part of the country after another attempt to peace talks has failed. So a ceasefire has failed, basically, to end fighting between the government and the M23 rebels.
Absolutely. I think that since March, when President Tshisekedi and President Paul Kagame met in Doha in Qatar, there were hopes that these talks was just the beginning of the ceasefire. They agreed to the terms of the ceasefire. They agreed to continue talking and dialogue, through Qatar. But it seems like even whatever they agreed on has actually fallen apart, because we see that the fighting has continued, that the ceasefire doesn't mean much for both the rebels and as well as the government.
Let's move to Angola now. The country is expected to become the 14th member of a SADC free trade area. What can you tell us about this story?
This is very exciting because Angola for the longest time has, not really been persuaded to join the Southern Africa Developing Community Free Trade Area. And so all of a sudden we hear that now they've come on board after intense negotiations. And in fact, they've agreed to actually 90% of, liberalization of tariffs, even though SADC only requires about 85%. So they've not only come on board, but they're willing to go over and above the requirements of joining this free trade area. And so this is encouraging because what we do is that it will open up trade among the 14 countries that have already signed up to this free trade area agreement. But it will also do a lot of other things. First of all, this is projected that it will create employment for Angola, that it would attract investment and direct trade between Angola and the existing countries within SADC.
What will it mean for how it looks and its reputation in terms of the international community on trade?
Well, I think that this is something that Angola needed to do. I mean, like I said, for the longest time, SADC has been trying to pursue Angola to come into the FTA, but there's been some hesitation. And we know why, because Angola is one of the richest oil countries in the southern region. And Angola has a lot of other international countries that have vested interest in that country. Therefore, they were very hesitant because they were not very sure about their standing in the international community and that how that would affect them if they joined the SADC FTA. But I think this is a positive step in the right direction because it will ease up their market share in the region. And also it will open up a lot of opportunities to the outside world as well.
Let's go to Gabon now. Industries in Gabon have welcomed the appointment to cabinet of Patrick Barbera Isaac, a unionist. He's appointed Minister of Labour there. When does he resume this post?
Well, the new Minister of Labour in Gabon, Patrick Barbera Isaac, actually took office the 1st of May. And he is a very popular trade unionist. He's been very successful at what he does. He seems to be a people person. And this is why you find that almost all the trade union organizations have welcomed his appointment. Right before that, he was the National Secretary of ODEP, which is an oil trade union. Organization within Gabon. And because of the role that he's played over time, I think a lot of people were thrilled about this appointment, except that there are a lot of expectations. He's going to make sure to deal with three things. First of all, the labor policies that affect Gabon. He has to make sure that labor laws are reformed and followed to the latter. He has to facilitate an environment where they will create employment for young people. The youth unemployment is about 37% in Gabon as we speak. And so there's so many expectations on the part of his performance. But he's a people person and he seems to be equal to the task.
As you say, unemployment is high in the country. What do you think should be part of his plans to tackle this particular issue?
Well, I think some of the things that can be done almost instantly is that we understand Gabon is now trying to diversify not only from oil deals, because if you look at Gabon's GDP, I think 40% of that GDP comes from oil. And so they're now going into natural gas. They're trying to go into tourism and other sectors so that they can liberalize the economy, so that they can diversify into other areas and be able to improve them. So if they do that, that will be the first step in terms of job creation, especially for young people.
Gabon is very oil reliant and heavily so. But besides oil, which other sectors do you think Minister Isaac should be looking into that are viable for expansion?
Agriculture. I think that Gabon should go into agriculture. They should go into tourism. These are some of the sectors that have not been fully tapped by the regime, by the government over the years. And so if they tap into some of these areas, I'm very much convinced that they can diversify from oil dependence. But also, one of the skills that Patrick brings to the table is that he is able to negotiate deals, is able to he understands the decency and the need for work. And so he's able to be the bridge between the employers and the employees and be able to find that balance that appeases both sides of the coin.
Let's move over to Chad now. They've reached a credit agreement with the International Monetary Fund. What does this agreement entail, first of all?
Well, the IMF and Chad have reached what they call the first staff level agreement. This is valued at $630 million. And this means that now it's up to the IMF executive board to sit down and look at what Chad has put on the table and what the IMF conditions are and be able to approve this extended credit facility to Chad. The only problem with the IMF is that we have seen that the IMF over time has not been a good partner for most African countries. I mean, Zambia is a classic example. In the 90s, the IMF had actually demanded that Zambia should privatize companies, even those companies that were viable at the time. They imposed conditions for Zambia to access this credit financing. Unfortunately, that was a catastrophe for Zambia in the 90s. Even recently, Zambia's first level staff level agreement with the IMF was actually reached on December 6, 2021. And then after that, and it was a very big deal among the people in government. In fact, this is when a new regime just took office, which is current now. And so we thought that that was the beginning of light at the end of the tunnel. But after that, we had subsequent other meetings and agreements that were that came down the pipeline. We saw another staff level agreement that was on April 6, 2023, November 20, 2023, June 3rd, 2024, and November 11, 2024. Until after those staff level agreements were reached, then Zambia was given some amount of money by the IMF. But even with that came with conditions. And that's been the biggest problem and setback for African countries. There's so many conditionalities attached to the help that comes from the IMF.
Chad has a Vision 2030 framework. If this 4-year agreement is reached upon or approved by the IMF, will this be all that Chad needs in terms of achieving this Vision 2030 framework, or can we expect that it's going to have other asks from other funders?
Well, what Chad wants to achieve, first and foremost, with this credit facility from the IMF is to reduce on its deficit. I think it's hoping that over the period of 4 years, they want to reduce that national deficit at least by 4%. Now, with the projections of what we've seen and with the Vision 2030, which actually is titled The Chad We Want, and also the National Development Plan that's been put forward by Chad, it looks like with the $630 million that they might get from this credit facility, they might well be on a good path. Now, like I said, this depends on what the conditionalities are from the IMF. Would that have adverse effect on the economy? even though the intention is to help the country get out of this mess. So that is yet to be seen, and we're not very sure if really the 6 strategies in the Vision 2030 will be reached at the end of 4 years.
Just briefly now, the African Development Bank Group meeting in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire has appointed Leandre Basole as Director General of the bank's regional office and head of the country office for Cameroon. He's a citizen of Burkina Faso. What do we know about him besides that?
Well, he's a very impressive individual. He served in many and various capacities. He was also Director General for the eastern part of Africa, as you know, also in many other. He has been a senior executive for the bank for over 19 to 20 years. He has vast experience, and he is not the only one that has been appointed during this period. Actually, the bank is meeting to vote today for the president. But before they do that, they have to appoint regional director general. And he's been picked to be the director general for Central Africa. And for all we know, he has a very impressive record. He's proven himself. And in fact, one of his legacies is that he was able to secure a deal between the African Development Bank and the Ethiopian Airlines Airport City, which is worth about $7.8 billion. So he is somebody that has vast experience, and there's a track record that you can see that his experience has been very beneficial for the bank over time.
Well, we wish him all the best, and we'll leave it on that note for today, Aaron. Thanks so much again for your time, and have a great Thursday.
Thank you, Asanda. Thank you for having me.
Aaron Ngambi is a geopolitical analyst and columnist talking to us, giving us an overview of headlines coming from the Central African region of our continent. 30 minutes past 6 Central African time it is. Let's say good morning to Jwalane Tulo Mwepe. She's got our news headlines.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. Making headlines, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Kenya's President William Ruto has publicly apologized to Tanzania following days of tension between the neighboring countries. And finally, renowned Kenyan author and academic Ngugi wa Thiong'o has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday. I will have details on these and other stories at 7 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Let's find out what's been happening in the world of sport as we say good morning to you. Fikile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good morning, Peter. Good morning, guys. Let me start off with football news this hour. Mamelodi Sundowns will now travel to Cairo for the second leg of the CAF Champions League against Egyptian side Pyramids after drawing 1-1 at Loftus Stadium at South Africa's capital Pretoria. The second leg will be played on the 1st of June at the 30th June Stadium in Cairo. Club chairperson Klopi Mutsepe says they are eager to arrive at the FIFA Club World Cup to be played in the USA as title holders.
We want to go to the Club World Cup as African champions. The thing is, we started the season wanting to be African champions. And so, you know, if we rewind really to the start of the season, and if you could tell me that you would be in our position right now, you know, having played one game in the Champions League final, drawn 1-1, and you have it all to play for in one loss final away from home to be the champions, I would be so excited. I'd probably take your hand off and I'd say, let's go for it. So the opportunity that we have is one that is so exciting. We as a football club see this as a privilege.
The chairperson reassured Sundown supporters that the club will still beef up the team, but perhaps not in time for their own opening game in America.
We'll go into the market, we'll look for the type of players that can complement what we're trying to achieve. And we have a wonderful technical director in sporting in Fleming Berg, as well as his assistant Ryan Hunt, and our board. And we're definitely going to try our best to make sure that the Sundowns you see next year is one that is only building on better things to come.
Now, tennis news. Jasmine Paolini moved into the third round of the French Open with a routine win against Australia's Ayla Tomljanovic. The fourth seed, who was a runner-up at Roland Garros last year, swept Tomljanovic aside in a 6-3, 6-3 victory, fresh from lifting a WTA 1000 title in Rome earlier this month. The victory was Paolini's 8th in a row. The world number 4 will face Ukraine's Yulia Staronobutseva or Russia's Anastasia Potapova next. Now on to golf news. The PGA Tour has scrapped starting strokes at the season-ending Tour Champions. Since 2019, the format allowed the player with the most FedEx Cup points to start the tournament on 10 under par. But in a change for this year's event, all 30 players will tee off at East Lake Golf Club in Atlanta on level par. The FedEx Cup is a season-long points competition which culminates with the playoffs, 3 tournaments that end with a Tour Championship. For any sports stories that you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fikile Lengwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. It's Channel Africa's birthday month. Happy birthday! Celebrate Africa's voice with us. Catch us on SABC Plus, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802 and Satellite Channel PAS10.
Let's say good morning to Chanduko Ligege, who has our economics update for the first time on Africa Rise and Shine.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. South Africa's Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Park Stau, has named Sizekaya Holdings as the preferred bidder to operate the 4th National Lottery and Sports Pools license. The company's shareholders include gambling company Gold Rush, linked to businessman Sandile Zungu. It was one of 8 consortiums that bid for the license. In a statement, the minister says he received a report from the National Lotteries Commission, NLC, on Monday regarding the satisfactory conclusion of negotiations with the preferred bidder for the 4th National Lottery license. Tshepa Mungwai reports.
Minister Tau thanked the parties to the negotiations for completing the work in time. However, he's lamented the fact that the matter has already become the subject of litigation and a judgment of the High Court. According to the minister, he's seeking legal advice with a view to appealing against the judgment's findings and orders. He says the announcement ends a long and difficult process of evaluating 8 applications for the 4th license.
The Office of the Tax Ombudsman in South Africa has revealed that incidents of the hijacking of e-filing profiles are on the rise. During an online release of the preliminary findings of the report, the Tax Ombudsman Yanga Mputa pointed out that the highest level of e-filing profile hijacking occurs among registered tax practitioners. Puter says tax practitioners accounted for 48% of e-filing profile hijacking, followed by individual taxpayers at 32%.
Because tax practitioners often handle multiple taxpayer accounts, which require them to log into various taxpayer profiles. This frequent switching off and switching on in multiple taxpayers' accounts, we think it elevates the access of e-profile hijacking and make them to be easy targets. And then another thing that is the target value, whereby if one tax practitioner log in, it gives the hackers or the profile hijackers a lot of access to other taxpayer accounts.
The CEO of Pepco, Peter Erasmus, says the recently launched fashion chain Ayana aims to have hundreds of stores in South Africa. This comes as the South African retailer targets trendier customers and embraces the fast fashion model of some rivals. Pepco, the owner of the Budget Pep and Ackermans clothing chains, is underrepresented in the adult clothing market, especially in women's wear. However, it has recently been expanding in that market with the acquisition of fashion businesses Legit, Style and Swagger. Online-only retailers Shein and Temu have grown rapidly by shipping inexpensive products directly to customers, forcing local retailers to find new ways of differentiating themselves. In West Africa, Ghana's cedi currency has jumped more than 40% versus the US dollar this year, far outperforming its African and emerging market peers, shrinking the cost of the country's foreign debt and giving it more fiscal breathing room. The rally, which has surprised some investors, is another much-needed boost for the West African nation as it claws its way back from debt default and a punishing economic crisis. In all, the cedi has gained 42% against the dollar since January. Ghanaian President John Mahama says the country has reduced its total debt over the last 5 months by $14.4 billion and that if the trajectory continues, the target of reaching 55 to 58% debt stability by 2028 will be reached by the end of this year. The Australian government has given its approval for a giant natural gas field to continue operating for another 40 years despite concerns from environmentalists. There are also worries that pollution from the north-west shelf threatens nearby indigenous rock art. The BBC's Katie Watson has the details.
As Australia's largest gas project, the decision came as no surprise. It's an economic driver in Western Australia, and it underlines the federal government's support for gas as part of Australia's transition to cleaner energy. But climate groups have warned this extension will be a major contributor to carbon emissions. The proposal had been under review for 6 years due to delays and appeals from groups objecting to it. The approval of the extension is subject to strict conditions. Woodside, the company who operates the site, has 10 days to respond to issues of air quality and cultural heritage management before the final decision is made.
Let's have a look at financial indicators at this hour. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 Naira 582. In Botswana, 13 Pula 26. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 39. Zambia, 27 Kwacha 20. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5.65. Russia, 80 rubles 3. India, 85 rupee 30. China, 70 yuan 19. South Africa, 17 rand 89 cents. $1 is at 73 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Gold is trading at $3,321. Platinum at $1,088 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $64.12 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 Central African Time on Channel Africa. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Okay, it's time for our G20 fact for this May 29th, this Thursday. South Africa's G20 presidency follows that of a troika of other major developing countries. The Indonesian presidency 2022 cast itself as the voice of the developing world and aligned the major systemic challenges of the world on trade, agriculture and infrastructure. The Indian presidency focused on reflecting the interests and voice of the South. And the hallmark of the Brazilian presidency was to invoke the spirit of Rio de Janeiro as the birthplace of the Sustainable Development Agenda. That's the Rio Summit of 1992. And that's our G20 fact this morning.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa. championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
Are you ready to level up your influence, your content, and your career? Join us at the Africa Creator Festival, where Africa's biggest brands and media powerhouses meet. From masterclasses, exclusive brand collabs, to the official signing of the Creator Charter. It's all happening at africacreatorfestival.com. Your next big move starts here, in partnership with the SABC. And remember, limited spots with unlimited possibilities. Book your tickets today at Quicket. Africa Creator Festival, powered by you.
A fresh morning, a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
The African Development Bank's group annual meetings are underway in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, with a clear and urgent call echoing through the halls. Africa must mobilize its own capital and chart a path towards economic self-reliance. From reflections on Dr. Akunmi's Adesina's decade-long legacy to the unveiling of the 2025 Africa Economic Outlook, the meetings are shaping critical conversations about the continent's financial future. I caught up with Desiree Asogbavi, who's the Africa Director at the Open Society Foundations, to share his reflections on the key takeaways so far from the continent's push for a new financial architecture to why domestic resource mobilization may be Africa's greatest untapped asset. And I began by asking him what had struck him the most in this year's meetings.
I have attended at least the last 3 annual meetings of the bank. But this meeting seems to have a particular importance. And I would say that what stands out this year is a very visible sense of urgency. And you can hear it in all the speeches that have been given over the last 2 days. Africa is facing a convergence of global crises. From the rising of debt service to the unprecedented cut of development aid and the shift of trade policies around the world, and mostly from some of the key developed countries. And you have expected that the tone will be of despair from African leaders, but yet that was not the case. The tone was very assertive, focus, and I would say unapologetically African. Leaders have been calling strongly for bold reforms, and there is a strong emphasis on continental ownership that we have never heard before. Call for economic sovereignty and call for rewriting the terms of engagement with global financial system. So this gathering this year seemed to be a bit different from the previous one.
All right. So you mentioned this strong emphasis on African self-reliance and capital mobilization. How realistic is this goal, though? And what steps are needed to make it happen?
I would say it is not only realistic, it is necessary. It is actually mandatory. There's no other way to express this. And I believe Africa does not have the choice. And we have seen the scenarios of COVID-19 where Africa has been left behind because the continent was not able to produce its own vaccine and could only receive left out vaccine from the other part of the world that is capable to create their vaccines. But in the same time, we see Africa losing billions every year through illicit financial flow, through tax evasion, through misaligned trade rules, etc. So if you see these situations, it is only normal to see that Africa decide basically to look inward to better manage the huge resources that the continent has. Now, it is not the first time you hear African leaders being bold, to move ahead. But I just want to believe that this time they don't have the choice they have to make it happen.
Dr. Akunwumi Adesina reflected on his 10 years at the helm of the bank, citing 565 million lives had been impacted and more than $100 billion invested. How would you assess his legacy?
I think Dr. Adesina's mandate, the two mandates he has, done, it was marked by ambitious initiatives than ever before. He has a firm belief in Africa's capacity to lead its own development. And that is something that is particular from the outgoing president. From his program called High Five to the response of the bank to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the African Financial Stability Mechanism, those legacies are very, very particular. And I can only believe that the incoming president take it on.
So one of the big ideas being floated is a new African financial architecture. What could this look like in practice, and how might it change Africa's place in global finance?
Yeah, I think the new African financial architecture could include first an African credit rating agency. And you know that the process of setting up a credit rating agencies from the continent is going on. It is being supported by the African Union, by some other partners, and being championed by the African Development Bank. The continent also needs a liquidity support facility, a stronger Continental Development Bank. AFDB need to raise more capital, to face, the big challenges that the continent is facing. And I think we need a more assertive African Union role in global financial negotiations. You know that the African Union has now become a full member of the G20. And I believe that this is an avenue for the Union to play a stronger role while deciding a worldwide, economic matters. So those are the urgent things that need to happen now. In addition, it is important to see more representations of the continent in many of those global financial systems. So far, Africa has been hugely misrepresented. I should also mention that the work towards an body, which is being in discussion now has to happen very quickly, because through that body, Africa will be more, will have more space, a stronger, and be able to cut down the illicit financial flows that I mentioned before.
So the African Economic Outlook report projects a continent-wide rebound in growth, particularly in East and West Africa. What do you think is driving this resilience?
I believe that the rebound is being driven by diversification in key economic infrastructure. We have seen a bit more of investment in digital innovation and the dynamism of African youths within the continent. Countries like Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal are leveraging strategic sectors such as the fintech, agriculture, value chain, and also renewable. We can also attribute it to regional integrations through, the building of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that is also showing small benefits, even though some more road, need to be done, to have a full functioning Continental Free Area.
So there are some challenges, I guess, that still remain, especially things like rising inflation and soaring debt service costs. What policy shifts or reforms do you think should be prioritized?
That is a big issue now. Is a big issue. Many African countries have now to use money that is set apart for health, educations, in order to be able to pay debt service. That is really unacceptable. And if you look at the cost of capital that is applied to the continent vis-a-vis the other part of the world, it is just unfair. So I believe that the continent needs to renegotiate the terms of the debt, push for a fairer credit assessment, and because that is the cause of a huge interest rate applied to the continent. I believe the continent has to invest in productive sectors rather than recurrent expenditure. And there is also a need to rethink the role of multilateral lenders. Some countries have been applying huge interest to the continent bilaterally. I think these need to be, reviewed seriously by the continent. Overall, the debt issue is an urgent one, without which the continent won't be able to move.
The report also mentions that Africa could raise over $1.4 trillion through better domestic resource mobilization. And I wonder, what are the key reforms or mechanisms that could unlock this?
I believe tax justice is at the heart of the responses or the solutions. The other one is to curb illicit financial flow that I mentioned before. The continent needs to tax better multinational corporation. The various countries have to improve their tax system so that they can have like a better tax base without, of course, overburdening the poor population in their countries. I think we also need a better digitalization of the tax system, and this is one of the problems where countries are not able to manage properly, their tax administrations. Our countries first should be sharing experience in that domain, but also learn from other countries, from everywhere. South-South cooperation, North-South cooperation, for example. Those should help to better manage tax system. But the most important is the financial flows, the tax evasions that we are seeing every day on our eyes. Africa loses about 89 billion every year through those loophole by mispricing and so on. So if they tackle some of those issues, I think the continent will be able to raise money from within.
And finally, a new AFDB president will be elected. What kind of leadership does Africa need at this critical juncture at an institution such as this?
I believe the bank needs a visionary, bold, and accountable leadership. Someone who understands, not just a theoretician, someone who has experience, field experience, who understands that development is not just about numbers, but about dignity and justice, and tackle to realities in our various countries. I believe the next president of the bank should build on the gain we have had over the last 10 years, while pushing the bank to be more inclusive, more responsive to citizen needs, and a catalytic in shifting power to African institutions. I think that is what reflects from the various declarations, speeches that we have been hearing since the annual meeting started 2 days ago. We need a builder of trust, a champion of reforms. Dr. Adesina has set the bar very higher, like very strong ambition. Now the time is to operate the reform that are needed for a more efficient bank, and and institutions that can build on the realities of the continent and not only grappling to orthodox rules at financial and economic levels.
No. All right, so that was Desiree Asogbavi, who's the Africa Director at the Open Society Foundation, speaking to me on the sidelines of the African Development Bank's annual meetings. And today is a very special day because voting for the new president will be taking place to replace the current president, President Adesina. And there are mostly male candidates and one female. 60 years later, they still haven't had a female president. So we wonder if Swazi Shabalala, South Africa's candidate that was put forward by President Ramaphosa, might get the nod. We'll have to wait and see a little bit later on.
We'll have to wait and see. As now we get into the next hour of Africa Rise and Shine. If you've just joined us, well, good morning. And thank you for doing just that here on Channel Africa. Remember, you can send your views and questions about our show at Channel Africa 1 is the social media handle across those various platforms. Let's take a moment to thank the team as well. On production is Hlengi Wemabaso, Joey Lekhodi, Pumuzo Ramagadza. On technical production is Nanda Koza. On news is Jwalani Tulo Mwepe. Sports brought to you by Fikile Lingwati. On social media is Talent Butelezi. And our economics updates brought to you by Chandugo Ligege.
Coming up in the next hour, we'll be taking a look at a number of things. We're going to go back to the DRC and to talk about Joseph Kabila. Is he in the country? It sounds like he is. What's he doing there? And he's gone to the east, to the troubled part of the continent. And this is amid him being having his immunity taken away and also his party suspended. So that's one of the stories. And the other, South Africa is deciding whether to deal with its interest rate. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it going to stay the same? The repo rate question. We'll have more of that and others after the news with Jwalani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Many suspect he is preparing to clamp down on the media as his supporters are pushing for his stay in government in 2030. Mnangagwa sent a stern warning against the media.
The past trends where media practitioners competed for prominence on the degree to which they demonized our country has no place in Zimbabwe we fought for. We are building the Zimbabwe we all want, including the media. Content that harms our country and the fellow citizens has no space in our constitutional democracy under my watch.
Kenya's President William Ruto has publicly apologized to Tanzania following days of tension between the neighboring countries. Some Kenyans on social media have been targeting Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan following the recent detention and deportation of prominent East African activists. Angry Tanzanian MPs on Monday accused Kenyans of cyberbullying and disrespecting Tanzanian sovereignty and meddling in domestic affairs. The diplomatic row was triggered by the deportation of activists who had travelled to Tanzania to attend the trial of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. South Africa's Umkhonto weSizwe Party Secretary General Floyd Shivambu has conceded while the party's parliamentary representatives are making positive contributions to policy formation, they need to be further capacitated to do their work. In an interview with SABC News, Shivambu rejected the notion that the MK party's voice as the official opposition in the legislature is muted, saying unlike the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters, the party does not seek unnecessary attention, choosing instead to work for the people.
If you pay close attention, you realize that there is a lot of work that is being done, and there's a lot of policy positions and propositions that we got from our representatives which get to be submitted in the Steering Committee on Finance, in the Defense Portfolio Committee, and a variety of other interventions as well as to just what should happen. And one other thing which South Africa should appreciate is that Mkhonto weSizwe is not a democratic alliance. Mkhonto weSizwe is not the economic freedom fighters. Mkhonto weSizwe is its own party, does not play to the gallery for just attention of social media.
Renowned Kenyan author and academic Ngugi wa Thiong'o has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday. Wa Thiong'o spent most of his time calling on Africans to reclaim their languages and cultures. He was imprisoned, beaten and banned in his own country, which he left in the 1970s and later settled in California. Sharon Bryce Pease has the story.
Daughter Wanjiku wa Ngugi said it was with a heavy heart that they announced the passing of their father on Wednesday morning. She wrote in a Facebook post that he lived a full life, fought a good fight, and that his last wish was a celebration of his life and work. His debut novel, Weep Not Child, was published in 1964, the first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa. He wrote at least 8 novels, including the politically conscious Petals of Blood, 3 collections of short stories, several plays, a collection of non-fiction and children's books, and was often favoured to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was targeted by former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, including his arrest and imprisonment in 1977 for a year, after which he lived in exile until Moi's retirement in 2002.
Billionaire Elon Musk has announced on his social media platform X that he's leaving his position within US President Donald Trump's cost-cutting task force. Musk has led the Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, since its inception this year. He says his scheduled time as a special government employee has ended. Musk has thanked Trump for the opportunity. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulo Mwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Nigeria survived the second half onslaught to set up a Jamaica clash in the Unity Cup final. Canadian teenager Victoria Mbogo continues to turn heads at the French Open. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Now, as Africa Month comes to an end, calls have been made for gaps in the African Union's institutional reform to be addressed. Academics, politicians and business leaders say that the AU's weaknesses are evident in its failure to deal with recent crises, including conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, and coups in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. Nhlanhla Mahlangu picks up the story.
This year marks 61 years since the founding of the Organization of the African Unity, OAU, now the African Union, a historic convergence of visionaries and revolutionaries on the 25th of May in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. As instability and underdevelopment persist, questions have been raised about whether the AU displays the systematic weaknesses of its predecessor, the Organization of the African Unity. The AU, launched in 2002, was meant to correct OAU weaknesses and achieve a more robust, proactive, and efficient organization. However, problems that plagued the OAU Secretariat seems to be resurfacing with the AU. Analysts say the AU can claim several achievements in the past decade, which include launching Agenda 2063, institutional reforms in the African Continental Free Trade Area, and its admission to the G20. But they say the AU and African multilateralism generally need new impetus. Speaking at the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, Professor Buleng Lenkabula, Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of South Africa, says with the reformed African Union, there's better continental constitutions and a common agenda.
As you know, there are many challenges that remain and to which we here in the different countries of the continent must put our hands on deck but also our intellectual insights to overcoming. As we will recall, since the formation of the OAU, we have experienced some few occasions where Africans were getting divided rather than being united. For example, we have seen the divisions between Eritrea and Ethiopia in 1993, Sudan and South Sudan in 2011, and some ongoing and emerging cessationist movements and territorial disputes in Morocco, Western Sahara, Somalia, Somaliland. We need to overcome the things that divide us as a people. The political processes and institutions of Africa cannot be understood or articulated outside the structures of the political economy.
Speaking at a business dialogue in Dar es Salaam, Vice President for Government Relations and Community Business Partner at Anglo Ashanti, William Lishilo, says the African Union should take its rightful place in tackling challenges faced by the continent.
The role of African Union needs to be looked at very seriously. A lot of things are happening in Africa. There's been conflicts and wars in Africa. There's been coups that has happened. We have not seen or heard the voice of African Union. And therefore, we do require African Union to be re-energized, to take its role and position. It is kind of saddening for myself, from the business sector, to have African leaders being called by one country to a summit of this country and Africa. Africa has got resources. Africa in itself, it's rich in minerals, it's rich in intellectual, it's rich in many things. And therefore, we need to take that advantage.
Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Ntlandla Mahlangu.
Yeah, today in history, Asanda, I'm going to take you back to 2002 because it was actually a really good moment for Sierra Leone. They lifted the state of emergency that had been in place due to the brutal civil war, 1991 to 2002. That's over 10 years, signalling the formal return to peace and civil order. So that was Sierra Leone. At 29 May 2002, fantastic news for them. And then in South Africa, one person called Cyril Ramaphosa was being inaugurated today for his first full term as president of South Africa. He could never have known what was lying ahead, but on this day he was very happy.
I feel like we need a jingle for this day in history. Just every time we pull it, and that just plays after that.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Always great knowing those gems of information. Let's go to the DRC now, where reports say the Democratic Republic of Congo's former president Joseph Kabila has arrived in the rebel-held eastern city of Goma for talks with locals. This comes a month after he declared his intention to help end the ongoing crisis in the war-ravaged region. If confirmed, his visit could complicate the US-backed efforts to end the rebellion by M23 armed group, which controls mineral-rich areas that the Trump administration is eager to develop. For more insight, we're joined on the line by Congolese political analyst Didier Bayeye. Didier, thank you for making time for us again at Channel Africa this Thursday. How are you?
Good morning, Asanda. I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you so much, and we appreciate you making time to chat to us on this. So,
always a pleasure.
Great. So, former President Joseph Kabila has reportedly returned to Goma again, a city now under the M23 rebel control. What do you make of the timing and potential motivations behind this?
All right. The main issue here, or the main question, is not the return of the former President Joseph Kabila to the DRC, but how he returned to the DRC and then from where he has entered. Now, before we even get there, analyze that, when he left, why he's come back, he's making headline. Was he a refugee? Was he an escapee? Or he was just a normal person that left his country for a reason well known to himself? That is where the question is. However, with the time and we looking at everything that's happening and how he returned, where he has entered the country from, Well, this is what is raising eyebrows, especially when linking the rumors that been spread already with him being in partnership with the M23 rebels, with him being the great supporters, with him being the supplier of finances and including guns to the M23. Well, this could justify why he decided to return to his country in through the region or space occupied by the same people he pretended to fight when he was in power.
We'll talk on that in terms of the M23 rebels. Let's start with the U.S. because they're supporting peace talks and mineral deals in eastern Congo. Yet fighting continues in the eastern DRC. After a ceasefire failed to end the fighting between the government and the rebels, how might Kabila's reappearance in this rebel-held zone complicate these efforts by the U.S.?
We don't think it will complicate much. Reason why we believe it will not complicate anything is that Kabila was himself, including some of his allies in the U.S. during the negotiation and the talk between the DRC government and the U.S. government in Washington, trying to seal this deal, to conclude and put everything in place. And they were there also trying to lobby so that this deal will not go through. But we have seen that effort failing. The U.S. is not coming because the place is in peace. The U.S. is coming. It's true that the U.S. want the rare material, but they also, part of the deal is also for the U.S. to bring peace, to bring security forces and latest technology to make peace in the area. So the United States is well aware of the situation of the belligerent in the area, of illicit exploitation of the minerals in the DRC by rebel groups supported by people like Joseph Kabila and other people. So the United States, we don't think this will really impact because they are aware of that. They were not coming to a peaceful area in the first place by entering into this deal with the United States.
Another possible complication, I don't know whether this one is, but on social media, a rebel spokesperson welcomed Kabila into the country. Kabila's immunity was stripped, we know before, by senators over his alleged support for the M23 rebels. Should the rebel group say anything at this point, or could this social media post be another possible complication to Kabila's return or his efforts?
Well, It's been a few months, or if not a year, when President Tshisekedi, in one of his media appearances, declared black on white that AFC of Nanga, one of the leader of the rebel in partnership with M23, is nothing else but that is Kabila. So he said it openly on the media. So there were a lot of criticism pertaining to that. How can the president say this about his predecessor? But now, with what the leader or the spokesperson of the rebels is saying, but it's just adding up, is just confirming the suspicions around Kabila working together with the rebels. Now, let's try to understand this, Asanda. Kabila is saying that when he was in power, he brought peace, he negotiated with the M23, he fought the M23, and all of a sudden, how can he go back to his perceived country and is protected by the very same people who are killing Congolese, who are slaughtering Congolese, and whom he's been fighting? It doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense. And there is also reports that from his arrival in Goma, he even went to see and encourage the camp. He went to see the camp of rebels, the training camp, and tried to give them support and encourage them. So this is just to confirm that he has never been with the Congolese people. He's never supported the DRC. Instead, he is the source of giving DRC to the neighbor, in particular Rwanda, to rule and loot the mineral resources.
From a regional perspective, with Rwanda denying involvement in the M23 and Kabila being accused also of coordinating with Paul Kagame, how do you interpret the current regional power plays in the Great Lakes region?
First of all, when we talk of regional involvement or regional concern in this DRC conflict, Asanda, it's sad to say that Africa in general and the region in particular have dismally failed in the DRC conflict, because Kabila has no other forces if it was not for Rwanda. Even now, there is footage showing that he's been guarded by Rwandan forces. And Rwanda, I think, has stopped denying its involvement, because even in the US, we didn't see the DRC government with the US government and the M23 rebel leaders negotiating. We saw Rwandan representative and the DRC representative and the US representative on the table. So if Rwanda is not involved, why is it always on the table of negotiation with the DRC? We've seen the same thing in Nairobi. The peace treaty in Nairobi, Rwanda was involved. The Rwanda is there, and the Doha, Rwanda was there. The US, Rwanda's there. So it's really, at this point, nobody can doubt that Rwanda is not involved, because it's clear that Rwanda is involved. It's clear Rwanda is destabilizing the Great Lake region and the rest of the region. We can see what Kabila tried to do by moving around, trying to seek leniency with some former presidents of Africa to defend him. And the rumor has it that is because these people, all of them have their interest mining concessions in the DRC, and then hence they try to defend Kabila. Yes. And then whoever tried to support Kabila at this time is an ignorant and the enemy to the peace of the Congolese people.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there. We are completely out of time, and we'll continue talking on this topic. It doesn't end. We're going to continue, and I'm sure we're going to have you express the rest of your very passionate views on this issue. But thanks again for your time on this Thursday.
Thanks a lot, Asanda, and good morning again.
Thanks. Sorry to cut you there, but we have to go. Didier Bayeye is political analyst, providing valuable insight into Joseph Kabila's visit or alleged visit to Goma.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The Shy Guy, a Morning Switch.
Have you ever listened to a song and then it gives you goosebumps? Cause it takes you way back in the 80s. My goodness. Hey, baby. You hear Yvonne Chaga Chaga there. I wanna talk to the DJ. And then the DJ goes like, hey, baby, I've got you on the other side. Huh? There were no WhatsApps then, right? There were no sliding in the DMs at the time. Oh, man.
Your weekend mornings are activated with the Shy Guy on the Morning Switch. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
It's a big day for South African consumers today, because the South African Reserve Bank is expected to announce its decision on the repo rate today, with inflation sitting comfortably within the target range at 2.7, 2.8%, and that's the lowest in over a year. There's growing debate about whether it's time to ease borrowing costs to spur economic activity. But others argue that holding the rate steady might be the safer option, given global economic headwinds, rand volatility, and ongoing domestic structural issues. Well, to help us unpack all of these issues and what we can expect, we are now joined by Frank Blackmore, who's the Chief Economist at KPMG South Africa. Frank, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Welcome.
So, Frank, the inflation rate has come down quite a bit. Given that, what do you reckon is going to happen later today?
Well, I think your introduction summarized it pretty well. Inflation is benign. In fact, it's below the bottom end of the 3 to 6% target range, and well below the center of that target range, that 4.5% we often hear these days. And that would give us an indication that if the bank wanted to reduce rates by an additional 25 basis points, it could comfortably do so. But the other part of the story came in your introduction as well, which is also true, is that the Reserve Bank sets policy now for the foreseeable future, so the next 12, 18 months. So it has to decide over that period, are there things that may influence the inflation rate and therefore the interest rate over this period. So although current inflation is very low and says, sure, we should have a cut, there are upside risks, as you said, the geopolitics. Will the US put trade tariffs on us? We might get sanctioned. The rand might lose some value. And all of that needs to be taken into account when setting interest rates, which just might mean that we continue to pause on those interest rate changes for the next, at least until the next meeting, when more clarity may be available.
If you were sitting in the MPC as one of the deciders, which way would you go and why?
Well, I'm biased because I'm a consumer as well and take part in this economy, and obviously a cut in rates would be beneficial to me and also other borrowers out there. It would mean I have a little more money in my pocket that I can then spend on other goods and services instead of repaying debts with that money. And it would also help to provide a boost, therefore, to the economy in terms of getting that growth a little higher than what we're seeing now. So I'd be inclined to cut. 25 basis points isn't going to impact one way or the other in a too large degree. So I'd be biased for a cut, given all indicators thus far.
So what's your biggest fear or risk, do you think, externally? You know, when we think about things like interest rates in the US or China's slowdown, what's your biggest worry?
The biggest worry would be just the geopolitical sort of trade tensions that are going on, what the impact on South Africa would specifically be. We know the president's recently been to the US. How did that turn out? I think there's just, the problem is uncertainty. If we knew that that meeting went well and the sort of future for the relations between South Africa and the United States in particular, but rest of the world as well, were going to be as expected, then I would definitely go for that reduction in rates. But if that turns out to be, somewhat more complex than what I've described, then South Africa could be, we could feel that impact through mainly the exchange rate, and that would translate to inflationary pressures back in the economy. In which case, leaving rates unchanged would probably be the prudent thing, at least for until the next meeting in July.
So if we look at the current inflation rate, some people might say the Reserve Bank is winning with its monetary policy, but I wonder, structural issues like South Africa's load shedding and a weak business confidence, fiscal constraints, do all of these limit the effectiveness of monetary policy?
I don't think the effectiveness of that. I think there's often this, where is growth in the economy created? Well, monetary policy sets an environment that's conducive to growth, and that environment should include low and stable inflation. Because if I'm a business, and I want to invest for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, a low and stable inflation rate, I can always calculate that in my business dealings. I have to borrow at one rate, I've got to repay at another rate, and I've got to make a return on that investment. And in order for that to all make sense in my business plans, I need that stable inflation rate environment. And I think that's what the monetary policy does rather well. The growth aspects, in terms of growth in the economy, that's more done in your fiscal policy with spending plans on things like your infrastructure and big public projects that allow the economy to grow at a higher rate over time. So monetary policy sets the scene, fiscal policy is more conducive to creating that growth environment. And I think, as you've said, monetary policy is done pretty well, but in an environment where we expected perhaps more growth to start taking place, given the fact that global inflation has reduced over the last year and a bit, to the levels that we're currently seeing now. But of course then these geopolitical events have started taking place, new administration in the US, and there's been a lot of uncertainty over trade globally, and that's kind of put a halt to this growth initiative that we would have thought would have come through given the lower rates and reduction in interest rates that we've seen over the last, let's say, year.
So we've run out of time, but very briefly, often the decision is one thing, but most people who are in the game listen to what is said supporting that decision and the tone. What will you be listening out for?
So first of all, obviously the decision will be important here. I think there are enough factors, as I've said, to allow a 25 basis point reduction, with a further view to perhaps another 25% reduction before the end of the year. And in order to know whether that's going to happen, I need to listen to what the MPC has got in their record regarding the risks, how they see the economy developing, how they see inflation, how they see growth, because all of those hold clues to what might happen in future. Another important thing is just to also see the votes. Is it a unanimous decision? Is it a split decision? And that often gives you the idea on how the panel is thinking about future reductions. So I'll be listening out for that in the speech.
Frank, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for that great analysis. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
That's Frank Blackmore, the chief economist at KPMG South Africa, and hinting towards a 0.25 percentage point drop in the interest rate. Let's keep our fingers crossed. It's time for your news headlines. Here's Dwalani Tulongwepe.
SABC News Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Making headlines. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Politicians and affected communities of mass killings during German colonial rule in Namibia have voiced fresh calls for reparations from Berlin. Namibia held its inaugural Memorial Day for the victims of the killings yesterday. And finally, a Swiss mountain village has been buried in a deluge of ice, mud and rock after a big chunk of a glacier broke off and crashed down into a valley. I will have details on these and other stories at 8 o'clock.
SABC News Headlines. The African Perspective.
Well, let's find out more about Nigeria being at the Unity Cup. Fikile Lingwati has our sports update, so he'll tell us more.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Yes, so let me start off with South Africa's women's senior national team's preparations for the Women's Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco in July are well on track. The African champions narrowly beat Botswana 3-2 in a Three Nations friendly match at the Lucas Moripe Stadium in Atteridgeville in the afternoon yesterday. South Africa is featuring in a Three Nations tournament featured Botswana and Zambia. Jermaine Seoposenwe scored Banyana's 2 goals, while Adriele Mibe scored the other. Botswana goals came from Lesego Radioganyo and Moloi Laone Penyoaone. And Nigeria claimed bragging rights over Ghana as the long-standing rivalry took center stage in West London. Nigeria beat Ghana 2-1. Nigeria hold on for the win and they will face Jamaica for the Unity Cup trophy on Saturday. The Unity Cup, an international football tournament that has returned for the first time in over 20 years, served up a game of 2 halves at Brentford's Gitag Community Stadium. Eric Chelly, who would have been the happier of the 2 managers at halftime as his side lead 2-0 thanks to a serial Denison strike and an own goal from Razak Simpson in the space of 5 minutes. However, the Black Stars rallied after the break and reduced the deficit when Brendan Thomas Asante scored his first international goal. Super Eagles head coach Chile, ahead of the kickoff, said he wanted to use this game and next month's friendly against Russia as preparations for their remaining World Cup qualifiers. And Mamelodi Sundowns will now travel to Cairo for the second leg of the CAF Champions League against Egyptian side Pyramids after drawing 1-1 at Loftus Stadium in South Africa's capital, Pretoria. The second leg will be played on the 1st of June at the 3rd June Stadium in Cairo. Club chairperson Kopi Motsepe says they are eager to arrive at the FIFA Club World Cup to be played at the USA as title holders.
We want to go to the Club World Cup as African champions. The thing is, we started the season wanting to be African champions. And so, if we rewind really to the start of the season, and if you could tell me that you would be in our position right now, having played 1 game in the Champions League final, drawn 1-1, and you have it all to play for in 1 loss final away from home to be the champions, I would be so excited. I'd probably take your hand off and I'd say, let's go for it. So the opportunity that we have is one that is so exciting. We as a football club see this as a privilege.
Let's end with tennis news. The unknown Victoria Mboko has reached the 3rd round of the French Open after yet another straight set win. This time over Eva Lace. Mboko had to come through qualifying to make her Grand Slam main drop debut, but now she finds herself in the 3rd round of the French Open. The 18-year-old Canadian claimed 3 sets wins in qualifying to book her appearance in the clay court tournament, and she has followed it up with 2 more 2-sets wins. First, she secured a 3-6-1, 7-6, 7-4 victory over Lulu Sun, who is at number 45th in the WTA rankings, and then beat world number 59th, Eva Lace, in the 2nd round. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Figile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Celebrate unity, progress, and pride. With Channel Africa, this Africa Month makes sure of it. For business, for culture, for Africa. Partner with Channel Africa because Africa's voice is the future. Africa is a story. A living has a voice, and that voice is Channel Africa. It keeps you in motion, speaking, singing, questioning, rising. Wake up with Rise and Shine 6 till 9. Peter and Asanda as they bring you breaking news, sharp analysis, and the voices that shape the day. On Channel Africa, we get on the move with Palisa and Benjamin, taking you to the African lifestyle, people, and the things that make Africa smile. 12 till 1, Africa Update. Breathing, ever-evolving masterpiece. And for over 5 decades now, one voice has told it like no other. Channel Africa. More than just a broadcaster, Channel Africa is the pulse of the continent. With Lulu Kabu, getting in-depth, powerful stories, and the perspective you won't hear anywhere else. The Upside, 1 till 4, live and real, with Tepuho Likweleni and Nompumelelo Ngubeni. Tame Ngubeni talks money, Africa in business, 4 till 5 p.m., 5 till 6. We put on a little bit more color.
Million euros.
African run,
$5 million
in
in application fees alone, trying to gain access to 29 countries that make up
England. With Joel Muteba, we go to East and Central Africa and find Darubinia Africa with I Am Shakif. Madapiri gives us some life. Zochitika, 7 till 8 p.m. Mariamo Kumalo, Kiswahili, Chinyanja, French.
Allegations that Elon Musk's SpaceX, which operates the satellite internet service Starlink, may be offering its services in South Africa without authorization. In a statement, the telecommunications regulator says it has formally engaged SpaceX to seek clarity on the reported activities and is currently awaiting a response. ICASA has urged members of the public and industry stakeholders who are in possession of any supporting evidence to submit it. Tsepa Mungwai reports.
ICASA says it has commenced with physical inspections in collaboration with other relevant organs of state to ensure a coordinated and lawful response. According to the regulator, if the investigations confirm any breach with regulatory and legislative frameworks, the authority will explore the applicable enforcement actions within its disposal, which may include, among others, lodging a formal complaint with the International Telecommunications Union. Tsepa Mungwai, SABC News, Johannesburg.
South Africa's Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Park Stau, has named Sizekaya Holdings as the preferred bidder to operate the 4th National Lottery and Sports Pools license. The company's shareholders include gambling company Gold Rush, linked to businessman Sandile Zungu. It was one of 8 consortiums that bid for the license. In a statement, the minister says he received a report from the National Lotteries Commission, NLC, on Monday regarding the satisfactory conclusion of negotiations with the preferred bidder for the 4th National Lottery license. Tsepa Mungwai reports.
Minister Tau thanked the parties to the negotiations for completing the work in time. However, he's lamented the fact that the matter has already become the subject of litigation and a judgment of the High Court. According to the minister, he's seeking legal advice with a view to appealing against the judgment's findings and orders. He says the announcement ends a long and difficult process of evaluating 8 applications for the 4th license.
Ghana's cedi currency has jumped more than 40% versus the US dollar this year, far outperforming its African and emerging market peers, shrinking the cost of the country's foreign debt and giving it more fiscal breathing room. The rally, which has surprised some investors, is another much-needed boost for the West African nation as it claws its way back from debt default and a punishing economic crisis. In all, the cedi has gained 42% against the dollar since January. Ghanaian President John Mahama says the country has reduced its total debt over the last 5 months by $14.4 billion and that if the trajectory continues, the target of reaching 55 to 58% debt sustainability by 2028 will be reached by the end of this year. A U.S. federal court has blocked U.S. President Donald Trump's global reciprocal trade tariffs from taking effect. The U.S. Court of International Trade has ruled that he overstepped his authority when he imposed the tariffs on nearly every country. Sharon Bryce Peace reports.
The 3-judge panel ruled that Trump overstepped his powers granted by the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act after signing an executive order invoking its authority to increase the country's competitive edge. The court said Trump's executive order exceeded any authority granted the president to regulate imports by means of tariffs. The court also ruled that the trade deficit issue did not meet the law's requirement that an emergency be triggered only by an unusual and extraordinary threat.
$1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira, 582 in Botswana, 13 pula 26. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 39. In Zambia, 27 kwacha 20. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 65. In Russia, 80 rubles 3. India, 85 rupee 30. China, 7 yuan 19. South Africa, $1 is at 17 rand 89 cents. $1 is at 73 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,321, platinum at $1,088 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $64.12 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
It's almost quarter to the hour, 7:44 Central African Time it is. Let's continue with our coverage of what's happening in and around our continent as we speak about visas. In 2024 alone, African countries lost an estimated $67.5 million in non-refundable Schengen visa application fees, according to data from the Lago Collective. The London-based research and arts organization has tracked European short-term visa trends since 2022 and identifies Africa as the region most adversely impacted by visa rejections. These losses represent more than just financial strain. They highlight a deeper issue of access, equity, and mobility for African citizens seeking opportunities abroad. Channel Africa's business reporter Innocent Samosa has more.
Nigerians have collectively lost more than 4.5 million euros, that's over $5 million in application fees alone, trying to gain access to 29 countries that make up the Schengen area. Despite submitting detailed documentation, Nigerian applicants continue to face high visa rejection rates. What are the root causes behind the persistent trend? Professor Lauren Landau, a senior researcher at both Wits University and Oxford University, weighs in.
I think the foundational issue to address is that this is not about administrative fairness. This is not a mistake. This is not about an issue with the bureaucrats and the processing. This is an intentional form of resource extraction, and it is an intentional form of symbolic messaging. The European Union wants people to know that this system is not fair, that this system is not in their favor, and that people applying do not have rights. So they do not have administrative recourse, and they are not guaranteed to be treated fairly.
He describes the system as a quiet mechanism for draining resources from the African continent.
This is a further way in which the European Union is extracting money from Africa and doing so in a way that is essentially asking Africans to pay for border control. It is asking Africans to pay for messaging that they are not wanted within the European Union.
According to Professor Landau, Nigerians are losing millions of dollars annually to non-refundable visa fees. It's unfortunate, he says, but people will continue to pay, hoping for a chance.
Of course, they need to file the forms correctly. The documents need to be in order, etc., etc. That would be the case for any administrative process engaging with the Europeans, with Africa, with Australia, etc. But no matter what they do, they will be rejected. Much like South African and Home Affairs, the idea is to reject and then force someone to appeal. But in this case, you don't have that opportunity to appeal. You must just pay again. So at present, as an individual, the only option is to keep paying.
So what can prospective applicants do to increase their chances of success? And are there any ongoing policy changes that could make the process more equitable?
What we need is the European Union to hear a message from the Nigerian government, from the African Union and other African governments, that this is unacceptable. And to put at stake European investments, trade, resource extraction, etc., from Africa if they do not treat Africans more fairly in these processes.
As visa costs rise and rejection rates remain stubbornly high, the burden on African applicants continue to grow. With millions lost each year and few clear answers, the call for greater transparency and reform is louder than ever. For many, the question remains, is the system designed to keep them out, or the cash is on their hopes? For Channel Africa News, I am Innocent Samosa in Johannesburg.
So the curtain has come down on the 11th Junior Indaba in Johannesburg in South Africa, where stakeholders in the mining sector gathered to reflect on opportunities, challenges and reforms that are needed to support junior mining operations across Africa. On the second and final day, the spotlight turned to policy clarity, licensing backlogs, and the distinct identity of junior miners with South Africa's mining legislation. Channel Africa reporter Lebohang Mabange picks up the story for us.
Junior miners are often seen as the future of mining in Africa, agile, risk-taking and able to pioneer exploration in untapped areas. But the regulatory environment they operate in may not be evolving fast enough to support them. Mzila Mtenjane, CEO of the Minerals Council South Africa, told delegates that South Africa still lacks a clear and targeted framework that defines and supports junior mining, a major obstacle to growth in the sector.
I think there needs to be specific reference to juniors with an understanding of what is meant by juniors. And we agree to the threshold. For instance, in the gold mining industry, if you read the same definition, I think the threshold is around 300,000 ounces. But that will differ, especially in South Africa where you've got, going forward, particularly bulk commodities. It needs to be a legislation that is specific to juniors and also not to be confounded with artisanal and small-scale mining, because that is different. And I think the attention of artisanal small-scale mining currently, in my view, is largely a reaction and a response to what we've seen in terms of illegal mining.
Mtenjane warned that lumping junior mining with artisanal or small-scale operations risks misdirecting both policy and funding. He believes this confusion may be fueling regulatory responses that are reactive rather than strategic, particularly when it comes to the fight against illegal mining.
And so the legislative environment then contributes to a third challenge around access to finance. Because, we can talk of incentives and many other issues, but the fundamental legislation in terms of how it's administered, how it's understood, what it's not providing for, if that's not in place, it doesn't provide for an incentive for anyone to risk their capital at that early stage of mining investment. And so we will get investors sitting on the sidelines, then waiting for the appropriate legislation and really to see if overall is there a climate where the country actually is encouraging for investment into exploration.
Many junior miners face long waits for mining rights and exploration permits, undermining investor confidence and delaying project development. Jacob Mbele, Director General of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, acknowledged the backlog but also defended the department's recent progress.
In the last financial year, which is the financial year ending March of this year, we processed a total of about 2,500 applications and purely permits, prospecting rights, as well as mining rights. Obviously, not all of them were successful. There were those that were rejected, but just to give you a sense of what went through.
But the numbers reveal a sobering reality. Most applications are still being rejected, with junior miners bearing the brunt of these delays.
We processed about 38 mining rights. The number that we usually used to throw out there of 5,000, it was not just only permits, it's a mix of various applications based on various sections of the legislation. So mining rights are a lower number compared to permits. In terms of prospecting rights, we had 795, and almost over about 700 of those were not successful for various reasons.
Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Leaders and representatives from the Economic Community of West Africa States, ECOWAS, are meeting in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital. The summit is to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the regional body. ECOWAS was set up on the 28th of May 1975 with 16 members to manage the regional economic and political integration of the region, which has over the years witnessed some strategic depletion of its membership, in addition to a burden of security challenges, which will form part of its discussions at the regional leaders review its successes and failures. Collins Nosa Otehengbe filed this report.
In these 5 decades, our community has made remarkable strides. The ECOWAS project is built on the desire of our member states to forge a path of cooperation, integration, and shared progress for our people.
The belief in that feat, as expressed by the President of ECOWAS Commission, Omar Toure, may have set the tone for what turned out to be an anniversary that is marked with thanksgiving and a high expectation to be able to overcome the challenges that the regional body is faced with. It was soon followed by a passionate call for oneness, which included a call by the only surviving soul among the founding fathers of the regional body in 1975, General Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria's former head of state. General Gowon, who along with the late Togolese president Nyasigbe Eyadema championed the clarion call for a regional integration, which eventually led to what was then known as the Lagos Accord, and it took time to inform dignitaries at the event why it became necessary for ECOWAS to be set up.
At that time, our region was emerging from the shadows of colonial bondage, grappling with the complex challenges of nation building, economic fragility, political instability, and weak national institutions. The promise of independence had yet to fully materialize in terms of economic and political freedom. It became increasingly clear to us that the way forward for our countries was not isolation, but through remaining steadfast together in the spirit of regional solidarity. We believed that by working together, we could break the chains of underdevelopment and lay the foundation for a self-sustaining, prosperous region.
Taking the cue from General Gowon, his predecessor in office, President Bola Tinubu laid down the expected path ECOWAS should take to accomplish the dream of the founding fathers so that the set objectives could tally with the future of member nations of the community.
Let us imagine a West Africa where no child is denied opportunity because of where they were born, where our borders are zones of cooperation, not conflict, where our economies thrive through joint effort, where our people work together towards peace, prosperity, and justice. This Golden Jubilee is not merely a celebration of the past, but a summons to shape the future. Let us draw strength from our history, courage from our struggles, and hope from our shared potential.
Why not losing the fact of the state of social, political, and economic affairs within the region? Nigeria's former ambassador to Burundi, Elijah Onyeagba, agreed that though the body recorded visible success in conflict resolution management and stability, ECOWAS has some contending issues that should be given urgent priority attention.
It has to deal with leadership. Issues relating to integration has been a lot easier. From 1975, you will see that there has been some level of consistency and improvement with respect to what is going on within ECOWAS. And of course, in comparison with SADC, with EAC, and maybe COMESA, for example, you will give a lot of credit to the West African leaders. Whereas these achievements are there, we also ask ourselves, what are the areas of improvement? You can look at issue of security. Breakaway nation states are also, coup d'etats is also a lot of issues.
If there's anything that has been highly prized in the belief of ECOWAS member states that the future will be bright, it is commonly called solidarity. The word featured in the addresses of everyone that has anything to say about the incipient years of the regional body and the strides that will help in betting safely. Omar Traore also shared that same belief in his address on what to expect.
We have demonstrated to the world that the African solution actually works. With the same spirit of solidarity and collective self-reliance, we are confronting the gravest challenges we face today: terrorism, climate change, unconstitutional change of government, poverty and economic disparities. With our strong collective will, I have no doubt that we shall overcome these challenges. Our strength lies in our unity, in our shared identity, and in the spirit of solidarity that defines our union.
The Economic Community of West African States was established on the 28th of May 1975 in Lagos with the goal of regional economic integration. It has implemented a number of protocols, including free movement of persons, goods and services, a regional judiciary system, common tariffs, joint peace force, and a sustainable democratic system which outlaws constitutional change of government among member states. There is a common passport also. It also has a common process of education, a regional electricity power project, and only recently ECOWAS has begun the process of introducing a common currency for the region. With these strides, it has set an example for other regional organizations on the continent to copy, even as the African Union adopted some of its protocols. From Lagos, I am Collins Nosato Hengwe for Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
So, and that takes us to the top of the hour, which means we have 1 hour left on the program.
On Rise and Shine. And if you've just joined us, well, you still have another hour to catch up in terms of what you need to know of what's happening in the continent and around it. My name is Asanda Beda with Peter Ndoro, and we're coming to you live from our Johannesburg studios in South Africa. 8 o'clock Central African time it is. Let's say good morning to Jwalane Tulongwepe for our news bulletin. And then following her will be Fikile Lingwati with sports headlines.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Many suspect he is preparing a clampdown on the media as his supporters are pushing for his stay in government in 2030. Mnangagwa sent a stern warning against the media.
The past trends where media practitioners competed for prominence on the degree to which they demonized our country has no place in Zimbabwe we fought for. We are building the Zimbabwe we all want, including the media. Content that harms our country and the fellow citizens has no space in our constitutional democracy under my watch.
Politicians and affected communities in Namibia of mass killings during German colonial rule have voiced fresh calls for reparations from Berlin. Namibia held its inaugural Memorial Day for the victims of the killings yesterday. German soldiers killed some 65,000 Ova Herero and 10,000 Nama people in 1904 to 1908. Tabiso Luhoko has the story.
Historians and the United Nations have long called the mass killings by the German colonial rule the first genocide of the 20th century. However, Germany officially described the massacre as a genocide for the first time in 2021, agreeing to fund development projects worth $1.2 billion in the southern African country, but stopping short of paying reparations. Namibian officials and representatives of the Ova Herero and Nama people say that is not enough. Namibian President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, however, told a solemn memorial event in the Parliament Gardens that Namibians should find a degree of comfort in the fact that the German government has agreed that German troops committed a genocide. Nandi-Ndaitwah further said, even though the two parties may not agree on the final quantum, it is part of the complex negotiations that started in 2013 with the German government.
Renowned Kenyan author and academic Ngugi wa Thiong'o has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday. Wa Thiong'o spent most of his time calling on Africans to reclaim their languages and cultures. He was imprisoned, beaten and banned in his own country, which he lived in the 1970s and later settled in California. Showan Bryce Pease has the story.
Daughter Wanjiku wa Ngugi said it was with a heavy heart that they announced the passing of their father on Wednesday morning. She wrote in a Facebook post that he lived a full life, fought a good fight, and that his last wish was a celebration of his life and work. His debut novel, Weep Not Child, was published in 1964, the first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa. He wrote at least 8 novels, including the politically conscious Petals of Blood, 3 collections of short stories, several plays, a collection of non-fiction and children's books, and was often favoured to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was targeted by former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, including his arrest and imprisonment in 1977 for a year, after which he lived in exile until Moi's retirement in 2002.
A Swiss mountain village has been buried in a deluge of ice, mud and rock after a big chunk of a glacier broke off and crashed into the valley. The BBC's Imogen Folks has the story.
Thousands of tons of mud and ice crashed down onto Blatten. The local authorities describe the situation as very bad and have asked for support from the Swiss Army's disaster relief unit. What's happened is the worst nightmare for many alpine communities. Global warming is causing the glaciers to melt faster and faster, and the permafrost, often described as the glue that holds the high mountains together, is also thawing. Blatten is certainly not the only community at risk.
Ambassador Francine Muyumba, former senator and influential figure from the Democratic Republic of Congo, says the country's deepening crisis is driven by systematic failures in governance, leadership and human rights. She believes regional and continental bodies have pursued the wrong strategies and firmly asserts that only Africans can solve African problems. She shared her views in a candid conversation with Channel Africa's Peter Ndoro.
So the regional bodies have failed completely, to be a bit alarming, but this is the way. We cannot have African issues to be dealt with in Washington or in Ndoro or in European Union. Why is the African Union there? Does the African Union still exist on this continent? Where is SADC? Our heroes, our founding presidents, where they are really questioning themselves if really, I don't think they're proud of what we are doing in terms of the way we deal with issues in Africa.
You can catch the full interview of Ambassador Francine Muyumba with Peter Ndoro on this week's podcast, Channel Africa Conversations on YouTube. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo Webe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And in our sports headline, Banyana's preparations for the Women's Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco are well on track. And Charlie Woods claims maiden AJGA title at Team Tailor Made Invitational. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Now, the month of May is recognized as Africa Month, a time when the continent of Africa commemorates the founding of the Organization of African Unity, or the OAU. And for many, it's also time to reflect on the many issues that the continent is still having to grapple with. In Dakar in Senegal, African leaders, civil society, youth and artists gathered for a powerful Pan-African dialogue under the theme Reparative Justice for Africans, Reclaiming Dignity and Building Accountability. Now, the event, spearheaded by the Open Society Foundations and other partners, called for bold steps towards a common African position on reparations for historical injustices, including slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. Well, to explore what all of this means and what it'll take to make reparative justice a reality, I spoke to Brian Kagoro, who's the Managing Director of Programs at the Open Society Foundations and one of the keynote voices at the Dakar Dialogue. I began by asking him why the focus was on reparations.
There is a historical reality that Africa never quite encountered. And partly because we thought things were disconnected. The first is the reality of chattel enslavement. Now, I must distinguish this from the arguments you will hear about all other civilizations had slaves. Chattel enslavement is a particular type of enslavement that turns the human being into property, property that can be bought and sold, traded in the market. So when this starts in Barbados, the first slave plantation, what you hear is there is a law passed that actually says Black people are not human. They're not fully human, so they're animals of burden. Chattel enslavement had three justifications. It had a religious justification, which was also bogus, fake news, but still replicated and repeated, that Blacks were descendants of Ham, so they were therefore cursed by God himself to be hewers of wood and carriers of water. It had a commercial justification. The early industrialization required labor, and that labor was required free, if not cheap. So in essence, once an enslaver had quote unquote bought or somehow acquired a slave, they were not under any obligation to pay any labor dues. What they would do is they would breed slaves the same way you breed your cattle or dogs. They would treat them with the same level of cruelty that they treated their beasts of burden. It had a third justification. The justification was white supremacy, the idea that whites are a superior race and that therefore all other races exist to serve them. And fast forward, so we have a moment of supposed abolition of enslavement, but still the needs of the empire, the needs of colonizing or enslaving states were still the same. They still required labor and raw materials. And so this time, colonization extended the logic of enslavement, of Black not being human and therefore could be treated any in plantations that were located in the Caribbean, in America, in Europe. To Blacks have no sense of ownership. So I've repeatedly cited the judgment of the British Privy Council in the case of INRE, Southern Rhodesia, in 1918, where they managed to do a case to determine the ownership of the land of what we now call Zimbabwe. At the time, it was called Southern Rhodesia, and the British judiciary concluded that Blacks or Africans had no sense of ownership, could not be equated at the same level of civility and civilization as everybody else. Now, there is an interesting thing that we need to pay attention to. The first transnational solidarity of Black people within Africa, where they stood up for each other, happened around that case. South African lawyers, South African trade unionists, South African activists actually took action, including sending a delegation to the Privy Council to try and dissuade them from this course. But what you realize with both the Barbados and the in re Southern Rhodesia judgments is that they spread like wildfire. And they informed what we now call the first, second, and third industrialization phase, which was built either on African labor, enslaved labor, or African raw materials. But even within the colonies, the practices of enslavement, of genocide, did not dissipate. That's why we refer to the 1908 Herero-Nama genocides. We have polite ways of referring to the Anglo-Boer or the Shona rebellion and etc. And wonder, how can people who own a country be rebelling? Who are they rebelling against? The Bele War and etc. and etc. But in essence, what happened is that settler colonialism, which is the same group of people or descendants of people who had been enslavers, came to settle in African soil and then arrogated themselves the right to superior positions, entitlement to the most arable land. And therefore, since their notion was that blacks were not fully human and had no notion of ownership, they could evict them. So this dispossession, land dispossession, the dehumanization that we experience, and when we're reading King Leopold's Congo, the amputation of arms because you're lazy, you're not working for King Leopold of the Belgium, who now owns your country, speaks to a fundamental historical injustice, which was a violation of both international law and domestic customary law. So it is a legal issue, but it is also a moral issue. And I think I've demonstrated it is an economic issue. So when you calculate just the unpaid labor and the land that was alienated or taken forcibly, that value runs into trillions, right? Why would this be important? A recent event that has happened and drawn international attention is the South African government, through its legislature, passed a law that sought to do land redistribution in realization of these historical injustices that I have alluded to. And the response from the US administration was swift and punitive, apart from making up a scandalous notion of white genocide. It's also just to impose sanctions. Now, this has antecedents. The same happened when Zimbabwe tried to do its land reform process. And at that time, the argument was there have been violent, so you have to allege that there has been violence against the whites, and therefore the entire white world and its white power should act, including mobilizing multilateralism to punish the so-called rebellious blacks. Now, in South Africa, of course, you had to make up the notion of violence so that you justify similar actions. So you have to equate it to what you saw in Zimbabwe, to equate the idea of an endangered race. Now, here is the irony. The same people who think that any danger to white farmers in South Africa merits them being given special protection and some form of compensation and repair balk at the idea of making similar remedies available to Black people, be it for chattel enslavement, for colonization, for apartheid, and for the Cold War. So this matter is important because it's at the center of global imagination of social justice. It's at the center of global imagination of equal humanity. The lie that we're a global village, that there is a universalism to our humanity, has been unmasked. So it is clear that there are others who believe that Black pain must be endured in perpetuity, that any memory or attempt to leverage that memory for purposes of redress is criminalized and punished especially by powerful West states.
So, what does reparations look like then in the African context in the modern times? Who would need to do the reparations and to whom? How would it work?
In some instances, it's fairly clear. If you take the residual colonial settler states, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia, the dispossessions are actually fairly recent, 1908 up to the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So this repair would be made to the communities. If you're talking about the Herero and the Nama people in Namibia, for example, if you're talking about the Khoisan people, for example, right, what you have is this large-scale genocide against folks, and then a large-scale seizure of their land. And it is important for us to look at what this means, because those communities now live in perpetual poverty. Those communities now are faced with very serious, if you look at the certain pathological things that have happened socially and economically to those communities, we're dealing with them now by borrowing money from the same nations that benefited from this colonial dispossession. So the descendants of the people dispossessed now have to borrow money for their self-development, the development, whether developing infrastructure, developing healthcare systems, education systems, opportunities for these people to develop, and access to land so that they are able to become productive. So I want to suggest to you that in that instance, those communities are clear. There are instances where the repair is to individuals. So, we talk about how Sankara, how Patrice Lumumba, how were executed by the apartheid regime or by the colonial regime with the connivance of the CIA and other Western agents. Those families suffered grievous harm. If you talk in South Africa about the Sharpeville massacre, right? There are specific descendants, and those descendants are still alive. Remember, some of the massacres went on into the late 70s, into the 80s. There are specific descendants of those families. But there are instances where repair may be owed both by the international community. You heard, of course, the Catholic Church confess its regrettable benefit from chattel enslavement, as did the Church of England, as did insurance firms like Lloyd's and others. Clearly, part of repair may be that acknowledgement of wrong, right? And therefore a contribution towards empowerment programs that target communities from which the wrong, that were most impacted by the wrong. There may be commitment to non-recurrence. And actually, the most recent events suggest that there is no such commitment to non-recurrence, right? And it could be memorialization. Memorialization is acknowledging that these were human beings, building a memory where their descendants can go. Think about the Shona chiefs, Chief Chingaira and others, whose heads were decapitated and taken to the museums in the United Kingdom. Part of repair may be returning those human remains, because in terms of Shona culture, Bantu culture, the spirit of the dead is deemed restless until particular rituals and burial processes have been done. It may also include restitution of cultural assets. So whether it's a Benin bronze and other cultural assets that were looted. So reparations is not just financial, it's not just compensation. Reparations is various things: satisfaction, which is developmental interventions that may target communities. It may be compensation, which targets specifically dispossessed, where you can prove the causality quite easily. It may be memorialization. So there's a whole spectrum of things that constitute repair. It could be acknowledgement and acceptance of wrong.
All right. And perhaps finally, so there is a momentum that's growing, and I've been seeing it and watching it for a while now with the issue of reparations. Is there a reciprocal movement towards acknowledging the need for reparations by those that need to effect the repair? Are we getting closer maybe to a reparations process actually playing out?
It's progress and regress. Just over the last 7 years, the Germans acknowledged that what happened in Namibia against the Herero and the Nama people, they started off saying it is events like a genocide, to actually acknowledgement that it is a genocide, and the UN Secretary General reiterated it was, by all intents and purposes, a genocide. We had acknowledgement by the Catholic Church, by the Church of England, and we've had acknowledgement in the US by Harvard University, by several other entities. And some entities are beginning to make repair. Conversation between the Caribbean states who have documented and tabulated how much it might cost to make repair through the Beda Commission, and stipulations by the Africa Development Bank on the cost of colonialism. There are three things that are required to make repair, to move to a repair process. Number one is the political will and commitment of African peoples and African leaders. So we've had this African Union resolution declaring this year, 2025, as a year for justice through reparations for Africans and Afro-descendants, for chattel enslavement, for colonialism and apartheid. But we need much more. You need institutions. You need a framework for reparations. Reparations is complicated in terms of how you actually calculate what repair or determine what repair is required in each context. And it is very contextual sometimes, right? Is that you do need panels of experts to do assessments within countries, within communities, and then determine whether repair is directly to the affected community, or it is to the generality of the citizens, or it is to specific families. We, as Africans, have moved, so rhetorically and politically, we've answered the question that we all believe that reparations are due. But setting the institutional framework that would enable repair to happen, and the preparedness at the national level, is that once you talk repair and you put a money figure to it, the usual corruption, the usual primitive accumulation tendencies come in. But once you talk repair writ large and link it to the other components, satisfaction, restitution, and etc., you don't have enough. I mean, there's been progress on restitution of African cultural assets, but it's not enough. It's not enough. The continent needs to answer questions such as building virtual museums, because some of these assets are owned by all of our common heritage, building repositories, bringing together and adequately remunerating African curators, African experts to trace some of the cultural assets that are strewn all over across the whole world. Memorialization, different types of memorializations suit different communities. There may be rituals that require collaboration with traditional leaders, with religious leaders. So by and large, this is not a struggle for a day, for a year. This is a struggle for many generations. At the center of it is not just African victimhood, it is the issue of agency. That there are three dimensions that we are healing from. We're healing from what we've done to ourselves. Sometimes our own atrocities have made sure that there are deep wounds in our societies. We're dealing with what others have done to us, which is this conversation with enslavers, with colonizers. But we are also healing from what we have not done in order to situate the youth and the future on a better footing. So this conversation about reparations is about, it's an acknowledgement of that wounded leaders and wounded communities reproduce woundedness, as Dr. Mkhapi once said. What we're trying to do is to set the future on a better path. What would that mean? It means, number one, we address some of the enslaved. Most of the enslaved communities and colonized communities are also the most climate vulnerable. The third, it's restructuring the international system that was established in order to justify and to perpetuate this ideology of Western or white supremacy, that's why the UN reforms conversation, the reform of the international financial architecture, and etc. And it's rethinking questions on whether it is debt that Africa should be asking for, or Africa should be saying, actually, we don't owe, we are owed. And this enables, the entire conversation on development financing is turned upside down when we look at reality. Is this justifiable, you might ask me? Every other civilization that has gone through some form of atrocity, and I dare not compare atrocities on whether losing 20 million people in the Congo is worse than losing 300,000 in a particular part of Europe. But every other civilization, whether it is the Japanese comfort women, or it is the survivors of the Holocaust, the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, or has been deemed entitled to repair, and in particular financial repair. There is always a mathematical problem when it comes to Black folk. So people start saying, how will we calculate it? But there's never been a problem when we're calculating it for everybody else, right? And that's the point, that this reparation struggle requires African intellectuals to come on board, because there are dimensions of repair, including the erasure of African knowledge, African contribution to science and intellectual property rights, and etc. Deliberate erasure, right? That needs to happen. It requires religious people to come on board, because there needs to be a cease and desist from a historical colonial religious approach that sees Africanness and Blackness as sin that needs repentance, and that looks at whiteness as the standard. I think what needs to happen is that a lot of Black clergy have been reticent to acknowledge, even to themselves, the atrocities committed by the Western world against Black folk, right? And there needs to be, beyond the spiritual and the intellectual, traditional leaders. A lot of traditional leaders got used to this colonial idea that there were outposts of the empire or of the colony, and therefore existed to discipline and punish the natives. But a more emancipatory approach to their role that looks at it in a future terms, in present terms, and historical terms is important. To build such a consensus requires us to also be mindful that repair will soon be demanded of our own local rulers. And so that's why it's a discomforting thing for governments, a discomforting thing for corporates, because some of the biggest violations we're seeing are done by corporates, by oligarchs, and etc. So it's an exciting struggle, but one that young people need to join, knowing it's not a one-day event, it's not a photo opportunity, it's not a tweet and we go and rest. It's bare knuckle fight, and it's going to take long.
That's Brian Kaugoro, who's the Managing Director of Programs at the Open Society Foundations, speaking to me about this long-term project of trying to get reparations for the many Africans across the continent and the diaspora that suffered in past years and decades. It's time for your news headlines. Here's Jolani Tulo Ngwepe.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Making headlines, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has launched a scathing attack on the media during the launch of the Zimbabwe media policy. In a chilling message, Mnangagwa says the law and justice system will take its course on those he says infringe on the rights of Zimbabweans. Politicians and affected communities in Namibia of mass killings by German colonial rule have voiced fresh calls for reparations from Berlin. Namibia held its inaugural Memorial Day for the victims of the killings yesterday. And finally, renowned Kenyan Kenyan author and academic Ngugi wa Thiong'o has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday. I will have details on these and other stories at 9 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Let's get our sports update. Here is Fikile Lingwati with the sports news.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. South Africa's women's senior national football teams Banyana's preparations for the Women's Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON in Morocco in July are well on track. The African champions narrowly beat Botswana 3-2 in a three-nations friendly match at the Lucas Moripe Stadium in Atteridgeville on Wednesday afternoon. South Africa is featuring in a three-nations tournament against the neighbors Botswana and Zambia, and they're looking forward to Morocco. Coach Desiree Ellis admits that the Women Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON title defense will not be easy for her side. Desiree Ellis says they will take it one game and day by day at a time.
We take it game by game and day by day. We don't have this big where we're going. We know where we want to go, but game by game and day by day. And I think that worked for us in the past, where we know the first game of any tournament. If you don't get the points in that one, you're always on the back foot. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that you're out, because the best second and the best third and all of that also gets to get in. But we don't want to put it in that position. We want to have our destiny in our own hands, to make sure that we don't have to take out the calculators. We don't have to say the what ifs, this team must do this team must do that. But we know it's not going to be easy. Yeah. Make no mistake.
Ellis speaks about different mechanisms the team should implement to be able to deal with the quality of opponents they will be facing within the Africa Cup of Nations in the North African sides.
So it shows that a lot of countries have put in a lot of investment to make sure that they get to the stage. And so we just have to take it game by game, day by day, and prepare really, really well, and have different scenarios and have a plan of, if this doesn't work, we've got to have that. If that doesn't work, we've got to have that. So we just got to make sure that, we get everything in order. And then it still might not work. It still might not work because maybe an opponent is just better.
And Nigeria claimed bragging rights over Ghana as the long-standing rivalry took center stage at the West London. Nigeria beat Ghana 2-1. Nigeria hold on for the win, and they will face Jamaica for the Unity Cup trophy on Saturday. The Unity Cup, an international football tournament that has returned for the first time in over 20 years, served up a game of two halves at Brentford's G-Tech Community Stadium. Eric Chelly's side would have been the happier of the two managers at halftime, as his side lead 2-0 thanks to a serial dresser's strike and an own goal from Razak Simpson in the space of 5 minutes. And in golf news, it is Tiger Woods' son, Charlie Woods, has won the AJGA's Team Tailor-Made Invitational at Streamsong Resort Black Course in Florida. The son of 15-time major winner Tiger, who attends Florida's Benjamin School, carried a 6 under 66 in his third and final round of the event to finish 15 under for the tournament to win by 3 over Ponte Vedra Beach Philip Durham, Arkansas' Willie Gordon, and Luke Colton of Texas. Woods' maiden victory on the prestigious junior golf circuit came after earlier rounds of 70 and 65, which left him heading into the final round, sharing the lead with another of the game's rising stars, Miles Russell. And finally, tennis news. The unknown Victoria Mboko has reached the third round of the French Open after yet another straight-set win, this time over Eva Lace. Mboko had to come through qualifying to make her Grand Slam main draw debut, but now she finds herself in the third round of the French Open. The 18-year-old Canadian claimed 3 sets wins in qualifying to book an appearance in the clay court tournament, and she has followed it up with 2 more 2-set wins. First, she secured a 6-1, 7-6, 7-4 victory over Lulu Sun, who is at number 45th in the WTA rankings, and then beat world number 59th, Eva Lace, in the second round. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fila Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Hey there, this is Balisa Dao, part of the dynamic duo that gives you on the move right here on Channel Africa from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Africa time. Well, it's with your help for the past 2 years that we have been a multi-award winning show.
Finally, yeah, we're keeping it on the move in 2025. And yes, I'm the other half of the duo, Benjamin Mushatama, and we're going to keep you going with the great conversations. Turn it up.
Okay. On the Move comes back in 2025 to give you more of the content that made us a Maldo and to deliver that bold, boundary-pushing content that you love. And of course, giving you a ride through the 3 hours of news, views, and entertainment.
Every weekday from 9 to midday Central African time, right here on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Cool.
Let's go.
A fresh morning, a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Right, let's get the final business news update right here on Rise and Shine with Chanduko Legege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has signed into law a contentious bill that requires all motorists to buy a radio license before acquiring vehicle insurance, a move not welcomed by many citizens. Under the amended Broadcasting Services Act, motorists must prove they have paid a fee of $92 to the state broadcaster Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation (ZBC) before they can obtain vehicle licenses or insurance. A registered legal practitioner of the Superior Court of Zimbabwe, Lennon Itai Rizi.
The reason for this new requirement, it appears, is to boost funding and revenue for our radio authorities in Zimbabwe, because in most cases people have not been complying to payment of these license fees.
Data from the legal collective suggests that in 2024 alone, African countries lost an estimated $67.5 million in non-refundable Schengen visa application fees. The London-based research and arts organization has tracked European short-term visa trends since 2022 and identifies Africa as the region most adversely impacted by visa rejections. These losses represent more than just financial strain. They highlight a deeper issue of access, equity, and mobility for African citizens seeking opportunities abroad. Innocent Simusa has more.
Nigerians have collectively lost more than 4.5 million euros, that's over $5 million in application fees alone, trying to gain access to 29 countries that make up the Schengen area. Despite submitting detailed documentation, Nigerian applicants continue to face high visa rejection rates.
In East Africa, Kenya's Equity Group has reported that pre-tax profit dropped to $145.2 million in the first quarter of 2025 from $156.7 million a year earlier as its interest income fell. The group, which also has operations in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and Democratic Republic of Congo, said its net interest income declined 12%. The Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, says it is investigating allegations that Elon Musk's SpaceX, which operates the satellite internet service Starlink, may be offering its services in South Africa without authorization. In a statement, the telecommunications regulator says it has formally engaged SpaceX to seek clarity on the reported activities and is currently awaiting a response. ICASA has urged members of the public and industry stakeholders who are in possession of any supporting evidence to submit it. Tsapamuwai reports.
ICASA says it has commenced with physical inspections in collaboration with other relevant organs of state to ensure a coordinated and lawful response. According to the regulator, if the investigations confirm any breach with regulatory and legislative frameworks, the authority will explore the applicable enforcement actions within its disposal, which may include, among others, lodging a formal complaint with the International Telecommunications Union. Tsepo Mongwai, SABC News, Johannesburg.
A U.S. federal court has blocked U.S. President Donald Trump's global reciprocal trade tariffs from taking effect. The U.S. Court of International Trade has ruled that he overstepped his authority when he imposed the tariffs on nearly every country. Showing Bryce Peace reports.
The three-judge panel ruled that Trump overstepped his powers granted by the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act after signing an executive order invoking its authority to increase the country's competitive edge. The court said Trump's executive order exceeded any authority granted the president to regulate imports by means of tariffs. The court also ruled that the trade deficit issue did not meet the law's requirement that an emergency be triggered only by an unusual and extraordinary threat.
Let's take a look at financial indicators at this hour. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 585, in Botswana 13 pula 28. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 41. Zambia 26 kwacha 71. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 66. Russia 79 rubles 90. India 85 rupee 42. China 71 19. South Africa, $1 is trading at 17 rand 92 cents. $1 is 74 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,273, platinum at $1,000.77 per ounce, and the Brent crude oil at $65.70 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email, newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Thanks, Chandugo, for that economics update. The South African Human Rights Commission undertook a series of engagements in the Gauteng province of South Africa this week, focusing on the protection of migrants' rights. The activities were led by Commissioner Aseza Ngungubele, who is responsible for migration, human settlements and climate justice in the Commission. He now joins us on the line. Commissioner, we welcome you to Africa Rise and Shine. How are you on this Thursday?
Good morning to you, Asanda, and good morning to the viewers and listeners.
Thanks for making time for us to discuss this particular issue. Let's maybe start by differentiating between migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers so we understand exactly what your commission is trying to engage on.
Thank you very much, Asanda. We have this focal area in the commission that deals with the migration, that deals with the rights of refugees. Refugees that will be the people that flee their country to other country because that might be escaping such issues like war, any other issue. Some seekers are the people that they also seek to move to other country, but with permit that they must be in the country that they apply there. Some seeking responsibility to the country. So what we do as the commission, as the part of the law or the Constitution of South Africa, we have overemphasized that everyone within the borders of the South Africa or within South Africa deserves rights like any other citizen in the country.
In terms of these engagements, what exactly are you aiming to achieve?
We have a threefold mandate as the Commission. One is to monitor if there is no right violation of anyone within the country. Also, that includes migrants. So what we do, we visit the centers. We first go to the detention centers. You will know that there's a Lindela. You will know there's a refugee center where people make their application and so on. Mm-hmm. So we just check that their rights are not being violated. They have been treated like any other person within the borders of South Africa. And also check the conditions of those detention centers. We even go to prisons to check that every rights like they have been protected. For instance, if you go to prison, you'll find that there was discrimination among the refugee communities or the migrants. So we're just making sure that their rights have been being protected. So what to do, the second step that we'll do the commission, if we see that their rights is being violated, then there's a second mandate, that's a protection. That's why we start entering in protection. That means it will be the issue that we can even litigate on their behalf.
Let's talk about the kind of complaints the Commission receives with regards to how migrants are treated in the country.
Look, kind of complaints this week, we undertook a monitoring visit, also by an engagement with the senior management of the Department of Home Affairs in the refugee center in Tshwane. Kind of thing that we received is within also amongst the migrants. For instance, there are those that might be affording, they might have money. There might be those that they don't have nothing. For what you see there, also amongst them, they are discriminated. The different treatment they get from the centers, it depends on those that they can afford. What they do, there's a kind of extortion by them. Those that in the place of services, government departments, they extort before you can be served. You have to pay certain fee, that is illegal fees, or else you're going to be continuously going to the center more than 2 to 5 times and you're not being assisted. That's the kind of complaints we received. And of course, the kind of complaints we received when we go to the repatriation center, that is the Lindela, it will be the issue of the delays in terms of deportation. And also we received in terms of the facilities also in the Lindela space, where we will see that there might be clear, there may not be no water, there might be some kind of issues of property damages. So that's kind of issue that we're dealing with as the Commission General when we deal with the issues of migrants.
And let's zoom into one of your visits. As you mentioned, it was to the Lindela Repatriation Center, a detention center for undocumented migrants in South Africa, where there are often alleged human rights abuses there. What else did you find? You mentioned of delays in deportation, lack of basic services. In terms of human rights abuses, what did you note?
What we have noted, in fact, we first meet management. You must just remember, Asanda, it was not our first visit. It was our follow-up visit. We have done it late last year in October, November. So we want to go check if there's any progress of the issues that we have picked up. But also something that is very interesting that we've picked up this time around was the issue. There was a mini riot in the center where the migrants also themselves have been one holding room. So what we also do with the Commission, we have also a responsibility to do advocates, but to also educate people on their rights and responsibilities. That's one of the key issues that we have identified. So we are undertaking that. Second to that, we have been working with the lawyers of human rights. The other issue that we've picked up that we also wanted to follow was the issue of the separation. When you deport a mother, you might be leaving the child behind. So we wanted to find out that has been the case that has happened. So we wanted to assurance that that have not happened, or is the child being united with the family. So that's the issue that we have dealt with. And we've also met with the senior officials in the department to assure us that that has been rectified. The child that might have left behind, they have been related to their parents.
Your other visit was to the Refugee Reception Center. You mentioned Tshwane, so this was the Pretoria one. What were your findings there?
It's quite very interesting. One, when we went there, as I think I've mentioned earlier on, one of the key challenges that in Tshwane, there is no queue management system. So it also a situation where, as I was mentioning earlier on, that those that might, in fact, it opens an opportunity for corrupt activities, for corrupt elements, because if there's no proper queue management system, you do not know when you'll be served. So whoever that comes can just jump the queue and be served. So there's that complaints among the refugee centers. But one of the other things that we've mentioned is the issue of the security systems within the center. There's no way that the security system is not that strong. They might be, but they're not able to detect what's going on within their center, in particular on the entrance level, where people have been robbed. And also we have also been told that, and also the management have confirmed that there's even also officials from the department, from the state security, not state security, but the law enforcement, that police, everyone else, that outside they just newly arrest people and then they ask money from them, so they extort them. So that kind of issue that we've picked up on the refugee center.
So these centers have since been referred to as repatriation centers by the Department of Home Affairs, as much as I was trying to explain that it's a detention center. Since the change in wording from detention to repatriation center, would you say that there have been notable positive progress in the better treatment of migrants in South Africa? I
must say, at the repatriation center, I must also share some positive thing. I think the management and the willingness of the leadership there to assist to making sure that the migrants' rights are not being violated, and also improving the services. In fact, they have also invited us as the commission that we must continuously regular visit the center so that we can able to confirm or just to monitor that everything that's been done is done within the human rights perspective. So they even offer an office in that particular center. So I must say that there might have been challenges, but of course there's a better treatment and there's improvement in terms of the general conditions of the center, but also protecting the rights of migrants.
How much of a burden to the SAPS or the South African Police Services do these holding facilities for especially illegal migrants add, and is South Africa well positioned to lessen the load on the SAPS?
Maybe let's just change it to say that undocumented instead of illegal, undocumented migrants. I think in the country in general, there are the police stations that have to deal with undocumented people. So there is not enough capacity. So in other towns, they might not have enough police station of facilities. To remember, to not mix them with the citizens or with South Africans. So they might not have enough capacity to deal with that. That's something that we've picked up on our monitoring. For instance, in the Western Cape, you will find there's only might be two, and then the distance to travel might be 2 to 3 hours. So across the country, there's something that we've picked up.
Well, thank you so much. Let's leave it there for now because we are out of time. But for the work that you do as well, we commend you. And especially in making sure that, either they are absorbed into the system legally of South Africa, these migrants, or they safely returned home. And as you mentioned, the other point I think we don't think of is how their families can get separated in that process of repatriation and how you're tackling that. So thanks again for your time, Commissioner Aseza.
Thank you very much, Asanda. Thank you for inviting us. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Aseza Ngungubele is responsible for migration at Human Settlements and Climate Justice at the South African Human Rights Commission, speaking to us on the line. So every Thursday, we launch the latest episode of our flagship podcast called Channel Africa Conversations, and it's presented by my partner over here, colleague Peter Ndoro. Peter, what can we look forward to in terms of this week's podcast?
So, Asanda, as you've been seeing in the news recently, the situation in the DRC continues to be a major concern, with all peace efforts from the region and beyond struggling to make headway. And to get some insights on the crisis and what could be the causes, I spoke to an opposition politician and former Senator, Ambassador Francine Muyamba, and she told me that the DRC at the moment has lost all of its democratic values.
We cannot talk about democracy without justice. We cannot talk about development and peace without justice. We need to run a country that respects the rule of law. A country that is guided by that constitution that we have. So when the law is being, people step on the law and they become more powerful than our laws, than our constitution, then we cannot talk about democracy. It doesn't exist almost at the moment.
And what else did the ambassador say?
Well, she felt that the regional bodies like the African Union and SADC had been pretty disappointing in the way that they dealt with the DRC crisis. And she says that it makes no sense for African issues, African problems to be fixed in far-off places like the US, Doha in the Middle East and Europe. And she says that the African Union specifically should really take the lead in finding a political solution. So you can catch that full conversation on our podcast, which is launched today on our YouTube channel. Look out for Channel Africa Conversations. But coming up after the 9 o'clock news, we have On the Move with Palesa and Benjamin. What can we look forward to?
Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Well, today, you know, the word divorce usually raises an eyebrow. It's seen as
Yes.
something negative, a breaking up of people who've
Yeah.
gone into a union. But today we're speaking about something that it does say divorce, but it's not as negative as we think. We're speaking about sleep divorce, and it seems like more and more couples are choosing to sleep apart just to have a better night's sleep. And apparently it can actually improve the nature of the relationship because of better sleep.
Just for sleep.
Just
to get better sleep.
Yeah.
But sleep is important. Hey, you need to have proper sleep. And if
there's
your
no
person
chance
has
of
an
that
issue
in
that
my house.
infringes on your right to sleep well.
So apparently it increases even intimacy between
Yeah.
partners because they have better night's sleep. And also it brings in some excitement into the relationship because now, you know, you
You miss
almost
your
have
person
to,
somehow.
you miss each other. And, you know, so we're going to be speaking about that in the first hour of the show. We'll be speaking to Dr. Beki Khole, pulmonologist and physician, about the benefits of sleep divorce. In today's Becoming feature, we're speaking about starting over. We'll be chatting to a guy by the name of Mpho Boja Mabonya, who changed his life around after a 12-year prison sentence. And they'll be chatting to us in the second hour of today's show.
What was he incarcerated for?
Well, we're going to find out.
Okay, actually, let's not give out too much.
Yes, and he's
We need
gone
to
to
stay
become an
tuned.
entrepreneur and someone who works a lot with the community. Then we wrap it up with our family and parenting corner. According to studies, despite the majority of straight parents saying that they consider supporting their LGBTQ plus community children, it seems like the children themselves are still not confident that their parents accept them, and many are becoming estranged to one or more family members. So we're going to take a look at what parent support really looks like for their LGBTQI plus children.
So it's a really difficult one because as a parent, you probably can see this little child of mine.
Not always, though.
No, but sometimes you can, right?
Yes.
And the thing is, you can't ask them or approach them until they're ready to share themselves. So what do
Right.
you do? Do you know what I mean? It's a challenging thing. And
Are you talking about the process of coming out or when they have come out?
Not particularly when they have come out.
That's what I also understood about
when
it.
they have come out and they're looking for your support. So sometimes parents will shun their children, and it happens a lot on the African continent, to say, I don't want that in my house. But those parents who do say, okay, it's fine, I accept you, it is what it is, still don't show full support. So there are instances where perhaps you say, okay, I support you, until I say I'm getting married to my same-sex partner. And you're like, no, it's an abomination.
Yeah.
So where's
Not like
the
that. I support you,
line
but not
of
like
support?
that.
No, exactly. I support you, but not like that.
religion and culture is a really difficult thing to overcome. Sometimes these parents are quite happy if it's just kept in the family.
Yes. And now if you start telling other people, they're like, you are embarrassing me.
Exactly. That's interesting.
Very interesting. I'm interested in that one as well. That sleep divorce. Is there a clause in our contract that we now amend since we've decided to change
I feel like
things?
it's about communication, and couples need to communicate easier and communicate more honestly.
At our house, that won't work. Anyway, that's how we come to the end of today's edition of Rise and Shine. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. Let's do it again tomorrow, bright and early, 6 a.m.
Bye from me, Asanda Beda, as well. See you tomorrow.
Here's the news with Jalani Tulongwe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Top stories. The Saba political analyst weighs in on former DRC president's return to the country, and Namibia calls for reparations from Berlin. Good morning. Congolese Kabila is in the rebel-held eastern city of Goma for talks with locals. If confirmed, his visit could complicate the US-backed efforts to end the rebellion by M23 armed groups, which control mineral-rich areas that the Trump administration is eager to develop. Bayeye elaborates.
The main issue here, or the main question, is not the return of the former President Joseph Kabila to the DRC, but how he returned to the DRC and then from where he has entered. Now, before we even get there or analyze that, when he left, why he's come back, he's making headline. Was he a refugee? Was he an escapee? Or he was just a normal person that left his country for a reason well known to himself? That is where the question is. However, with the time and we looking at everything that's happening and how he returned, where he has entered the country from, well, this is what is raising eyebrows.
Politicians on affected communities in Namibia of mass killings during German colonial rule have voiced fresh calls for reparations from Berlin. Namibia held its inaugural Memorial Day for the victims of the killings yesterday. German soldiers killed some 65,000 Ovaherero and 10,000 Nama people in 1904 to 1903. Tabiso Lehoko has the story.
Historians and the United Nations have long called the mass killings by the German colonial rule the first genocide of the 20th time in 2021, agreeing to fund development projects worth $1.2 billion in the southern African country, but stopping short of paying reparations. Namibian officials and representatives of the Ovaherero and Nama people say that is not enough. Namibian President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, however, told a solemn memorial event in the Parliament Gardens that Namibians should find a degree of comfort in the fact that the German government has agreed that German troops committed a genocide.
Renowned Kenyan author and academic Ngungi Waitongo has died at the age of 87. His daughter has confirmed that he died in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday, while Tiongo spent most of his time calling on Africans to reclaim their languages and cultures. He was imprisoned, beaten and banned in his own country, which he left in the 1970s and later settled in California. Shawan Bryce Pease has the story.
He said it was with a heavy heart that they announced the passing of their father on Wednesday morning. She wrote in a Facebook post that he lived a full life, fought a good fight, and that his last wish was a celebration of his life and work. His debut novel, Weep Not Child, was published in 1964. The first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa. He wrote at least 8 novels, including The Politically Conscious Petals of Blood, 3 collections of short stories, several plays, a collection of non-fiction and children's books, and was often favored to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was targeted by former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, including his arrest and imprisonment in 1977 for a year, after which he lived in exile until Moi's retirement in 2002.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington will impose visa restrictions on foreign nationals they deem to be censoring Americans. He suggests that this could apply to officials who regulate U.S. technology firms. The BBC's Tom Bateman has the story.
This is a significant escalation by the Trump administration, which has been waging a campaign against laws in European and Latin American countries meant to prevent harmful online content. These visa restrictions have been encouraged by several Trump allies in government, including Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of the social media platform X, who last year repeatedly criticised UK authorities as they pursued online offenders and so-called influencers accused of spreading hate and inciting violence during last summer's riots.
Ambassador Francine Muyumba, a former senator and influential figure from the Democratic Republic of Congo, says the country's deepening crisis is driven by systematic failures in governance, leadership and human rights. She believes regional and continental bodies have pursued the wrong strategies and firmly asserts that only Africans can solve African problems. She shared her views in a candid conversation with Channel Africa's Peter Ndoro.
And there are things that are happening that are terrible. All opposition parties, when your passport expires, the government refuses to renew your passport. So you cannot have a passport anymore. My children of only 3 years old were taken passports away at the airport of Kinshasa. Serious human rights problems that are happening in Congo that people are not talking about and are believing manipulations of the regime in Kinshasa.
You can catch the full interview of Ambassador Francine Muyumba with Peter Ndoro on this week's podcast, Channel Africa Conversations on YouTube. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo-Mwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Good morning and happy Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in to Channel Africa. And thank you to the morning team. That's Asanda, Beda and Peter Ndoro, who kickstarted this morning with Africa Rise and Shine. Very interesting conversations and sort of getting a grip of what's going on the continent and the world over. It's now 7 minutes past 9 Central Africa time. And you're with Benjamin Moshatama and myself, Palesa Tau. And of course,
supposed to be saying you with Palesa Tau and Benjamin.
No, today I'm with Benjamin Moshatama and Palesa Tau. So you got to change it up sometimes, Benji. And you're tuned in to On The Move right here on Channel Africa, giving you the African perspective. Join us and tap into today's conversations on channelafrica.co.za. That's www.channelafrica.co.za. On the SABC Plus app, another great way to be a part of the Channel Africa family. And our audio bouquets, DSTV, channel 802, and OpenView HD, channel 628. There are a lot of interesting conversations. You know, the word divorce, I say it like that because it sounds like a big, scary word, and it usually raises eyebrows and makes people's chest tighten up because it's not particularly a good word. Well, it hasn't been said to be a good word for many years. But today we're saying the word divorce in a positive light. In fact, we're speaking about something called sleep divorce. And it seems like many couples these days are preferring to sleep separately. No, not because they've had a fight, not because they're separating, and not because they're estranged, because they want better sleep. Maybe one partner snores, maybe one partner plays karate in their sleep and keeps kicking the other partner, or maybe there just isn't enough space in the bed.
So you know the hoarders of the space or the hoarders of the blankets.
Who are they? I don't know.
The one who just pulls all the blankets
and you're like left cold.
Yeah, and then
they
take the entire bed space.
Yeah. And so this sleep divorce is couples consciously preferring to sleep apart so that they can get better rest. And in fact, it's said to improve the quality of their sleep, improve their mood, improve concentration, but also maybe even improve the relationship between the two. We'll be talking to Dr. Becky Khole, a pulmonologist and physician, about the benefits of sleep divorce, why it happens, and the communication that actually needs to take place between the couples and themselves so that sleep divorce doesn't end in actual divorce.
Apparently it does something also to the sex life.
Oh, we're going to find out about that in the first hour of the show. We go into our Becoming feature where we look at the African human experience, and it is quite hard to start over, especially if you feel like, in fact, especially when you've done something so bad that you've landed up in prison. We'll be speaking to ex-convict Mpho Bourgeois Maponya, who turned a 12-year sentence at the Kgosi Mampuru Correctional Center here in South Africa into a new life purpose and